The Achaemenid Empire took shape between 550 and 330 BCE across wide dry plains, river valleys, and mountain passes. Rulers managed distance with planned routes, sealed documents, and small permit tablets. Hoof thuds on packed earth, slow cart wheels, and low hearth smoke set a steady sound and air. A road line met a post light. A tablet lay on a table. A seal rested near a string. The main road linked western Anatolia to the Iranian plateau, and then to lowlands near the Persian Gulf. Later writers called this the Royal Road. The surface was not uniform, yet it stayed firm enough for carts, riders, and pack animals. Crews set a bed of packed soil and added gravel where needed. Ditches guided rainwater toward low points. Stones marked changes in direction near passes and river approaches. Work likely began under reforms by Darius in the late 6th century BCE. Travel moved by day stages, not fixed miles. A day stage meant the ground a rider or caravan could cover in daylight with one set of animals. Ancient reports listed many stations along the route and gave a long total distance near 2,600 kilometers, about 1,600 miles. Scholars treat the figures as helpful, but not exact. What remained clear was the rhythm: ride, halt, feed, rest, and record the needed notes. The pattern repeated from post to post. Staging posts matched water sources and terrain. A typical post held a yard for animals, a roofed room, jars for grain, and a well or spring. A hearth gave steady heat for a pot and warmed wax in cool months. The yard gate opened to a short path back to the road for quick entry and exit. Buckets knocked lightly on a curb as water was pulled. Grain rustled from sacks into low troughs. Leather tack creaked while a groom checked straps and knots. The courier system relied on fresh mounts kept at these posts. A royal courier was an official messenger with written orders and a sign of authority. On arrival, the courier paused only to change animals and confirm the note. A post manager recorded the time, the ration issued, and the seal mark on the paper or clay. A fresh horse was led forward. Reins were checked. The rider set out again. Hoofbeats began hard, then settled into an even pace along the next stage. Night brought lamps and low voices at the posts, and the work stayed routine. Guards watched bridges and narrow passes nearby. A post manager checked stores and looked over door seals before sleep. Oil lamps hissed softly as wicks fed the flame. Wind moved dust along the yard wall. Dogs shifted near the gate and then became still. Administrative records suggest that small detachments kept order at key points. The tone remained constant and regular, not tense or loud. Documents directed this traffic. A common item was a travel permit tablet, sometimes called a passport tablet by modern scholars. A permit tablet was a small clay or parchment note that authorized passage and set entitlements for supplies. It named the bearer, the route or post, and the ration expected. It carried a seal mark from an office. Officials at posts checked the mark, wrote a brief receipt, and issued grain, fodder, and sometimes wine. The exchange took minutes within a practiced sequence. Writing for permits and receipts used clear administrative scripts. Two main scripts in southwestern centers were Elamite and Imperial Aramaic. Elamite, the administrative language in southwestern Iran, appears on many clay records. The Persepolis fortification tablets date mainly to 509-494 BCE and preserve these routine entries. A scribe held a clay pad in one hand and pressed signs with a reed stylus. The tool touched damp clay with a dry, regular sound. Tablets dried near a low hearth or in warm air. Seals secured containers and closed notes. A cylinder seal was a small carved stone that made a pattern when rolled across wet clay. A stamp seal was a small flat or domed stone pressed straight down to leave a design. A bulla, a clay envelope for tokens or a tied string, covered knots on a cord and carried seal impressions. Warm beeswax sometimes formed a thin layer on top to shed dust and help clay set. The smell stayed light and resinous. When the clay hardened, the impression kept crisp lines. A sealed note showed who authorized a message and whether it remained closed. A sealed jar showed that contents had not been opened since the last inspection. When a courier arrived with a sealed packet, the post manager logged the mark and the time. If orders required forwarding, he added his own small mark on the string tie. If orders required holding, he stored the packet in a room with other sealed items. Such rooms kept cool air and steady shade through the day. Rations and receipts formed a large part of the paperwork. Tablets recorded flour, beer, wine, oil, and fodder for animals. Entries named the receiver, the amount, the date, and the reason. Scales kept portions even. Standard weights stood near a table. Stones or cast metal pieces that matched agreed units. Scale pans clinked softly when placed back on a hook. Grain poured in a fine stream from jar to bowl. A scribe counted, wrote, and placed the tablet on a drying board. The road crossed rivers with ferries and bridges when possible. In Anatolia, timber bridges spanned wide, slow water at selected points. In Mesopotamia, crews used ferries in deep channels and led animals through shallows when the season allowed. A ferry pole knocked against a deck as a boatman set course. A shallow wake touched a bank with a soft slap. At high water, posts increased fodder stores because crossings took longer. The system adjusted to seasons and kept the same steady pattern. Seasonal planning shaped departures. Snow narrowed high passes in winter and made ground slick near saddles. Summer heat stretched some day stages and shortened others. Schedules favored spring and autumn for long moves across the plateau and the Zagros foothills. Guides listed springs, groves, and caravan grounds that offered safe halts. Wind moved through tamarisk near water places. Goat bells clicked on a slope above the road. Lists kept travel regular and predictable for staff and carriers. Local roads fed into the main corridor from villages and satrapal centers. A satrap, a provincial governor, managed tax, justice, and defense for a region. Roads from farms and market towns carried grain, timber, textiles, and reports toward larger depots. Western centers such as Sardis linked to the main route near the Aegean. Eastern lines joined near the plateau. Reports moved both ways. Orders out, accounts back. Wagon rims clicked over hard gravel. Wheels creaked at a gate and then grew quiet. Seal cutters worked in small workshops. They selected hard stones, often chalcedony or similar, and shaped them with fine abrasives. A cutter carved lines backward on a cylinder, so the rolling impression read forward. He tested each design on damp clay and checked details. Fine grit whispered under file strokes. The finished seal fit the hand. An official wore it on a cord or kept it in a small case. Offices kept a record of each pattern and owner. At an administrative table, tools sat in fixed places for speed and order. A reed stylus lay on a board near a small water bowl. Weights grouped by size stood near the scale. A string, a lump of clay, and a pot of warm wax stood by. The clerk moved through short, regular steps, read a permit, check a seal, measure a ration, write a receipt, press an impression. The space stayed quiet except for low voices, a soft jar glug, and a light brush across clay. Security used simple means that fit the road. guards watched bridge ends and pass mouths. Posts kept spare cords and clay, so seals could be replaced if they broke in handling. A broken seal was noted and replaced under the post manager's mark. A jar or packet with a missing seal could be held for an officer. The aim was smooth movement and rare tampering. Lamplight drew small halos on yardstones during these checks. The network served many needs at once. It carried royal orders, satrap reports, and supply tallies. It also moved festival notices, craft requests, and staff lists. Merchants used nearby paths and market tracks that paralleled official stages. Caravans paced themselves to avoid interfering with courier changes. When troops used the road, posts issued larger rations, and the record steps remained the same. The tone of surviving tablets points to a system built for routine. Anchors sit in known places and dates. The Persepolis fortification tablets show daily administration in 509-494 BCE. Sardis and Susa appear in lists of routes and offices. Herodotus described stages and stations along a long west-east line. Seal impressions from many sites repeat patterns across decades. Together, these sources outline a practical design. Roads connected stations, seals linked officials to offices, and tablets fixed entries to time. Materials were chosen for work, not display. Packed earth could be repaired by local crews with simple tools. Clay for tablets was near at hand and cheap. Beeswax and resin were easy to warm and renew. Hard stone seals lasted for years with careful use. Cord could be replaced daily. A stable kept a spare halter and a repair awl at the door. A broom stood near the yard to sweep chaff. The system relied on items that could be fixed on site. Timing depended on clear starts and stops. Couriers arrived, changed mounts, and left with little pause. Managers marked times in daylight or by lamp at night. If a full tablet could not be made at once, a note on a shard served until a tablet was ready. The shard went into a basket and later into a file. When a tablet dried, it slid into a shelf slot. Breezes from an open vent kept the room dry. Clay dust mixed with warm oil near the lamp. The edge of empire did not change the pattern. Posts at margins kept fodder, water, seals, and tablets. Local words changed, but record steps did not. A rider announced arrival, a manager checked a mark, a scribe wrote a line, and a groom led a fresh mount forward. Sounds remained even, hoof strikes, bucket lifts, and short breaths from animals at rest. A steady plan held a wide space together without strain or display. A road line carried a rider toward a post. A lamp burned near a door. A clerk set a small clay tablet on a board and reached for his stylus. The impression of a cylinder seal dried next to it, edges clean and plain. A cord held a firm bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string. Outside, hoof thuds passed the gate and grew soft. Inside, the room kept low talk, a jar glug and warm wax with a light resin scent. Road building in the Achaemenid period used common materials and steady steps. Crews packed earth and gravel into a firm bed that resisted ruts and standing water. Work likely gathered pace under early reforms by Darius in the late 6th century BCE. The chosen line ran where grades were mild and water could be managed. Teams worked in linked sections, so progress felt even along the route. Morning air stayed cold while mattock taps and cart creaks marked the start. Route selection came first and set the rest of the work. Surveyors walked the ground and noted springs, gentle saddles, and firm soils. They used cords, simple poles, and paced counts to keep a straight bearing. Scholars suggest they marked the line with wooden stakes and light earth mounds. The method matched a goal of day stages and dependable halts, not perfect geometry. Footsteps pressed frost on short grass, while cords pulled tight between stakes. Clearing and grading opened the ground to a workable width. Workers cut brush, lifted stones, and scraped soft topsoil into side heaps. A mattock, a digging tool with a flat blade, loosened roots and thin ledges. Shovels and baskets moved the spoil out of the bed. Where the ground rose in small humps, crews shaved it to a shallow, even plane. Dust rose in short puffs, and the scent of dry stems mixed with cold air. Good drainage kept the bed stable through changing seasons. Builders shaped a camber, a slight rise in the center of a road for drainage. Shallow side ditches carried water toward low points and natural channels. Where the line crossed a seasonal run, they set a culvert, a small drain under a road. Flat stones lined the outlet so the bank would hold. Rammers worked the shoulders so edges stayed firm. Soft thuds carried as tools pressed the soil into place. The base layer used local gravel and broken stone. Workers spread coarse pieces first, then added a finer layer above. Water from jars settled the dust and helped particles lock when pressed. A rammer, a tool for compressing soil or gravel, packed the layer in short, even strikes. In some places, a stone roller, a heavy cylindrical stone, likely added weight to the press. Pebbles clicked under pressure, then grew quiet when the surface set. Cuttings and causeways kept grades moderate across uneven ground. On a hillside, crews cut a bench and stacked small retaining walls of dry stone. In low ground, they raised the bed with firm fill and capped it with gravel. Pack animals pulled sledges where carts could not pass. Teams shifted soil from a borrow pit near the work. Rope fibers rasped on wood as sledges moved, and heels crunched across the fresh spread. Soft soils asked for extra steps before a finish layer. Crews laid brushwood mats or flat stone plates to bridge weak patches. They added sand and fine gravel to fill gaps and shed water. The surface was then pressed again to fix the set. At the edge, they built small berms to hold the top course. When the sun rose higher, the surface dried to a pale, even tone. A wheel passed and left no deep mark. River approaches needed careful shaping even when bridges were absent. For fords, builders straightened the ramps and armored them with stone. They set marker poles to show the safest line in normal flow. Where ferries served, they graded the landing and formed a wide turning area. Posts stood with spare rope, and a low shed stored poles and pegs. Water moved with a steady hush while workers trimmed the bank. Material supply ran as its own routine beside the main work. Gravel came from stream beds and shallow pits on nearby fans. Larger stones came from short quarries along low ridges. Carts carried the heavier loads. Donkeys and mules moved baskets and sacks. Yards near the line held piles by size, covered with brush to limit dust. The cart axle gave a regular squeak, and a handler adjusted a strap with a dull creak. Tools were plain and repairable at the site. Handles came from local wood and were shaped to a comfortable oval. Iron bits on picks and mattocks were sharpened at small forges near the line. A water jar stood close to the anvil to cool the edge. Low bellows hissed while a worker set a new pin. Spare cords, stakes, and a short line of poles leaned against a yard wall. The work climate stayed ordered and quiet. Organization placed tasks in short cycles through a workday. A foreman walked the section, checked grades, and assigned teams to layers. A marking crew kept the line true. A ditch crew shaped drains and outlets. A spreading crew built up the layers, and a ramming crew followed behind. Ration jars reached the yard by cart and were measured at midday. The measure record went onto a small tablet, while shade gathered near the wall. Seasonal timing set the larger plan for each reach. Spring and autumn offered mild air and better soil behavior. In winter, frozen layers resisted shaping and then softened at noon. In summer, the top dried too quickly without water on hand. Managers set starts for cool months and matched supply carts to those windows. When heat rose, crews shifted to maintenance near shaded sections. The wind carried a dry dust scent and distant animal bells. Markers and notes guided later users and repair crews. Stones at bends and passes showed the intended line in poor light. Simple posts marked distances between known posts rather than exact miles. At major halts, a yard wall carried written notices for staff. The writing listed rules for carts, rest times, and water use. A waxed tablet recorded repairs due after the next rain. The reed stylus made short, regular scratches on the surface. Repair was expected and built into the system. After a storm, crews walked the line and checked culverts and ditches. They swept silt from outlets, opened drains, and added gravel to shallow ruts. When a wheel broke the edge, they trimmed it square and rebuilt the berm. In long, dry spells, they damped the top lightly before ramming. The goal was not a permanent fix, but a steady surface through the year. The sound was low and even. Tamp, scrape, pour, and tamp again. Bridges and formal ferries stood at large crossings, but smaller spans also mattered. Over minor channels, builders set short stone slabs that rested on simple piers. Above marshy reaches, they made corduroy beds with logs, then topped them with gravel. Each carried carts without deep bounce or sink. Oxen pulled slowly, and loads stayed balanced on the level. Water gurgled under the planks, steady and soft. Posts near the ends held spare wedges and pins. The line passed through mixed ground, open steppe, low hills, and narrow saddles. On rises, the crew cut switchbacks only when the grade forced it. On flats, they kept long straight segments to save time and fuel. Trees near the path were trimmed above cart height to protect loads. Where wind blew sand across the bed, they planted low shrubs as screens. Leaves moved with a light rasp, while sand drifted in thin lines. Support spaces developed beside the work. Store yards held stone piles, timber, and rope, sorted by size and use. A small shelter kept tools dry and gave shade during short rests. A shallow well or cistern supplied water for mixing and drinking. Each yard kept a record board for deliveries and returns. At dusk, a foreman counted rammers, picks, and ropes, then tied the shed door. Lamps burned with low hiss while notes were checked. Administrative records tied field work to central offices. Orders for a new section arrived sealed and listed target lengths and dates. Ration allotments for workers and animals were set in advance. Receipts at yards recorded gravel weights and cart trips. The Persepolis fortification tablets, dated 509-494 BCE, preserve many such entries. They show flour, wine, and fodder issued in measured amounts. A clerk pressed a seal and placed the drying tablet on a board. Local knowledge improved the line without changing the plan. Villagers pointed out a spring that held through late summer. Herdsmen showed a safer crossing on a small tributary. The main corridor stayed where surveyors placed it, but minor bends adjusted around firm ground. Small cairns on nearby slopes served as sight points. A stake line moved 5 steps to avoid a soft patch. The adjustment saved labor and kept the surface sound. When the base corridor neared completion, finishing teams gave a smooth, compact top. They brushed loose grit away from the center toward the edges. They patched small hollows with fine material and pressed them flat. The camber remained slight but clear for water flow. Side ditches were trimmed and set free of blockages. At a final pass, a roller or team of rammers gave the even press. Cartwheels then moved with a steady, mild sound rather than a harsh rattle. Ewes followed close behind the finish. Couriers tested day stages and reported slow stretches. Cart drivers learned where to rest animals and refill jars. Inns and yards took shape at suitable intervals, with walls turned from wind. Guards sat near narrow passes and bridge ends as a routine measure. Reports of needed repairs moved back to yard boards and then to district offices. The system felt predictable, which made messages move with little strain. Across the central plateau, the method repeated in section after section. Packed earth and gravel formed the core. Simple drains carried water away. Small structures helped where ground demanded it. Tools were few, and parts were easy to replace. Roles were clear: survey, clear, shape, lay, press, and keep. The soundscape stayed regular from dawn to dusk: taps on stone, thuds on soil, and the slow creak of carts. By the early 5th century BCE, main corridors linked western and southwestern centers through passes and plains. Sardis in the west and Susa in the southwest anchored well-known ends. Other branches met the line from satrapal towns and fertile basins. The roadbed varied with local stone and climate, yet the working idea held. Users planned travel by day stages rather than exact miles. Horses drank, carts were checked, and lamps were trimmed at the same quiet hours. In late 6th century mornings, crews met chill air with steady pace. A mattock bit shallow cuts, a shovel slid soil aside. A rammer set a rhythm as a top course settled. A cart rolled a short distance and stopped for a small adjustment. Hoof thuds passed and faded. The surface lay firm enough for the seal, the tablet, and the message that needed to move. Survey in the Achaemenid period centered on repeatable walking and simple tools. Work dated mainly to the 6th and 5th centuries BCE across the Iranian plateau. Surveyors paced ground, pulled cords straight, and marked points that travelers could find again. A reed cord kept short lines true between stakes. A tally of steps gave length estimates for each piece. Footwear pressed compacted soil with a dry, even sound. Notes went on to small tablets while morning air stayed cool. Teams defined distance by what people and animals could cover in daylight. A day stage meant one controlled push between planned halts. Horses with light loads moved faster than carts with grain, so stages varied. Managers set targets by terrain and season rather than fixed miles. A normal stage often fell near 30 kilometers, about 20 miles, on level ground. Uphill grades shortened that range. Downhill grades or open plains sometimes extended it. A simple kit supported this work. The survey line used pegs, a reed cord, a measuring rod, and a pouch of markers. A scribe carried a tablet and a reed stylus. A foreman observed the ground, chose the line, and confirmed waypoints. The cord stretched tight between two pegs to guide straight segments. The rod checked shoulder height against cut banks and ditches. Pebbles in a small bowl-tracked step counts in groups of tens. Pacing started with a known stride. The surveyor set a standard step on firm ground and tested it against rod lengths. He adjusted for soft patches and strong wind. He repeated the count until numbers matched within an accepted band. Double pacing, measured out and back, caught small errors. When a long count finished, the scribe noted the total and the ground type. Sand gave a muffled crunch. Fine gravel clicked, then settled under the next pass. Markers made waypoints easy to see and hard to confuse. Crews favored features that changed little: springs, stone outcrops, groves, and saddles. Where natural markers were rare, they built small cairns or set cut stones. A post might carry a simple sign for staff. Ditches met the road at right angles near a waypoint to help orientation. Waypoints appeared on tablets as short lines, from spring to grove, with the step count beside it. The list felt plain and clear. Timekeeping remained basic, but consistent in each district. Sun height gave rough hours, and a shadow staff helped fix midday. A gnomon, a vertical stick for tracking the sun's shadow, marked solar noon on a board. Water jars sometimes served as steady drips for short intervals. Scholars suggest water clocks were known regionally, though not always used in the field. Managers preferred simple signs that needed few spare parts. A low drip and light scratch were the main sounds. Records joined distance with time to build dependable day stages. Couriers reported how long each stage took under normal loads. Cart drivers added notes on slow stretches and soft edges. Guards at passes logged delays after storms. Scribes wrote these entries in Elamite or Imperial Aramaic, depending on the office. A seal impression confirmed each update. The tablet dried near a lamp with a gentle hiss. The surface held clear lines for later review. Standard units helped compare reports across long corridors. Some lists used the parasang, a step-based distance unit in Persian use. Writers later described one parasang near 5 kilometers, about 3 miles. Field crews did not force every stage into that shape. They treated the unit as a guide, then matched it to ground and water. Tables showed both step counts and stage notes. The combination worked well for travelers and repair teams. Stages were built around water and forage as much as length. A spring with a shallow basin helped carts and animals share the edge. A yard with a well-supported longer halts. Grain stores set ration size and refilling plans. If a spring dropped in late summer, staff moved the halt a short distance. The shift appeared on the next tablet with a new step count and a short remark. Wind moved light dust along the wall while entries dried. Routes crossed mixed terrain, so timing adjusted by slope and surface. On slopes, crews counted shorter steps and added time for climbs. On flats, they increased stride and reduced allowances. In winter, ice and snow narrowed passes and made careful footwork necessary. In summer, heat slowed animals at midday. Stages started earlier and ended earlier to protect loads. Managers kept the same method, but they shifted clocks without changing the line. Communication between stations kept measures current. Post managers sent small packets with new counts and notes after seasonal checks. A receiving post confirmed the seal, copied key lines, and pressed its own mark. The system aligned records without long meetings. When repair closed a short reach, detours received temporary stage counts. These appeared in slim strips tied to the main tablet. String fibers rasped softly as clerks tied them in place. Some sections needed closer spacing of waypoints. In featureless ground, crews set posts at steady intervals. Posts carried crosscuts to reduce confusion in blowing dust. On ridge lines, stones marked both the crest and the nearest windbreak. Where the road met a long salt pan, cairns stood on low islands of firm soil. The soundscape stayed sparse, light step taps and cord pulls. Travelers matched what they saw to what the tablet described. Animals shaped measures as much as maps did. Horses kept a strong pace but needed fodder and water at predictable times. Donkeys moved slower but endured heat and rough paths. Ox carts pulled well on firm ground, then lost time in soft fills. The day stage blended these needs into one number, A courier's count meant little if a grain cart could not keep time. Reports balanced these facts and held to the quiet goal of regular movement. Waypoints also supported repairs and inspection. After rain, crews walked between 2 points and checked culverts and ditches. They counted steps to note exactly where silt or soft edges appeared. They opened outlets, trimmed edges, and compacted fresh fill. The note on the tablet matched the step count to a fixed marker. A broom brushed loose grit from the center toward the sides. The road settled again into its usual form. Bridges and fords received separate timing notes. Water rise added minutes for crossings. Crews updated stage tables for wet months and dry months. Ferries also carried stage times, since queues changed pacing. A pole struck the deck with a dull knock as the boat pushed off. The bank gave a soft slap under the wake. Clerks entered a dry figure beside the water line on the board. It held true until the next change of season. Cords and rods kept lines straight within a useful margin. The cord went taut between stakes, then relaxed for the next pull. Rod marks on banks helped confirm a consistent camber. Stakes showed the direction after a bend. When a cord frayed, crews spliced it and tested length against the rod. Spare pegs replaced split ones. The tools were small enough to carry in a shoulder bag. The bag's leather rubbed quietly against a tunic seam. Field offices organized these measures into compact itineraries. An itinerary listed stages in order with notes on ground, water, and time. It did not offer vivid description. It provided clear cues that any trained person could follow. Entries named a spring, a grove, a saddle, or a post. They ended with a short sign for a bridge or ferry. A seal impression closed the strip. The clay dried to a firm surface with crisp edges. Training ensured uniform habits across districts. New staff learned the standard step and the recording format. They practiced double pacing and counting pebbles by tens. They learned to read the sun with the gnomon and to log noon. They kept their kit simple and in working order. They followed a set path for copying entries to the main tablet. The only loud sounds were rare, a dropped weight or a startled animal. Travel practice confirmed the measures through daily use. Couriers tested fresh counts and sent back small corrections. Cart drivers reported where the surface loosened. Guards noted slow approaches to bridge ends during busy days. Managers compared notes, changed a figure by a small amount, and sealed the update. The rhythm stayed steady. Measure, record, test, and edit. The result was a practical map in short lines. Some writers in later periods offered long totals for the road. Those totals give a sense of scale, but do not drive field work. In the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, staff focused on day stages and waypoints. The combination kept people, animals, and loads on time, without strain. It also let new staff step into a known pattern. Fresh eyes matched the ground to the tablet, then marked a small change if needed. At night, posts used lamps to read and copy stage notes. A wick burned with a quiet hiss in a shallow bowl. A stylus pressed soft clay and left clean strokes. Copies dried on a board in warm air. The next rider carried the update forward. The next cart driver saw the same line at the next post. Each post kept its own file board with strips stacked in order. The stack stayed neat and easy to scan. In winter, timing blocks expanded. Crews allowed more minutes for ice at fords and shaded bends. In spring, meltwater made some ditches run full and slowed short reaches. Summer heat shortened midday work and moved rests under trees or walls. Autumn winds cleared dust and helped surfaces dry. Stage tables switched by season with spare lines already prepared. A clerk lifted one strip and set down another. The process stayed quiet and exact. Across the Iranian plateau, this method linked distance with time in useful ways. It respected ground, water, animals, and light. It relied on training more than on heavy devices. It used cords, pegs, rods, and a few marks on clay. Reed cords stretched tight and then coiled soft in a bag. Footfalls stayed measured on compacted ground. The next day began with the same careful pace. The line stayed clear and the record stayed brief and plain. Relay stations were simple. Strong spaces built for routine speed. Many stood along the principal east-west road by the early 5th century BCE. Each post shared core parts: a walled yard for animals, a roofed room for stores, a small office table, and a well or cistern. The gate opened toward the road for quick turns. Troughs lined one side, and a shaded corner held feed bins. Bucket splash and grain rustle carried across the open yard. Hoof taps sounded on compacted earth, regular and calm. Water stood at the center of every post plan. Where the water table lay high, crews dug a lined well with a curb. Where groundwater was deep, managers relied on a cistern filled from runoff or from a qanat, an underground water channel. A rope and bucket served both well and cistern. The bucket lip knocked lightly on stone, then poured into a trough with a soft run. Dippers washed between uses. A short drain led overflow to a shallow soak pit. Fodder supply followed a clear cycle matched to season and stage traffic. Barley and chopped straw filled covered bins. Compressed cakes of fodder sat on racks against a dry wall. A scale and standard weights kept portions even. Scribes recorded measures in steady lines. Sack cords creaked as knots were tied and untied. Chaff drifted in thin arcs and fell quiet. A broom stood in the corner to clear sweepings after each feed. Mice traps sat behind bins and were checked daily. Stable space hosted animals waiting for assignment. Tie rails and short stalls stood under a lean-to roof. Leather tack hung from pegs in size order. Spare halters lay coiled in baskets. A farrier, a worker who tended hooves and shoes, kept a small kit near the door. Files, nails, and a small hammer rested in a wrapped roll. Hoof clips rang lightly when lifted, then settled back with a faint tap. The air held dry hay scent and warm animal breath. Staffing remained small and practiced. A post manager set priorities and held the seal for receipts. A scribe handled tablets and copied entries for passing riders. 2 or 3 grooms watered, fed, and prepared mounts. Where traffic was heavy, a farrier and a guard joined the team. Duties followed a clock that matched day stages on that reach. At first light, troughs filled. Midday brought feed and short checks. Evening closed with counts and lamp trimming. The post kept a slow, even rhythm. Arrival and exchange moved through short, exact steps. A courier rode in, slowed at the gate, and stopped at the tie rail. A groom took the reins while another brought the fresh mount forward. The manager checked the seal mark on the courier's tablet or packet. A ration entry and time mark went onto a receipt strip. The tired horse received water in measured turns to avoid chill. Grain slid into a shallow pan with a dry whisper. The courier mounted the fresh horse and left at once. The worn mount moved to cool shade and careful care. A groom lifted the saddle, checked the back for rub, and brushed dust away. A low bucket glugged as clean water met the trough. The horse drank in short sets while the groom watched. Hooves were picked, and a quick file stroke smoothed a small edge. When the animal settled, a light cloth covered the back until hair dried. Leather straps were rubbed with oil. The stable grew quiet again. Paperwork linked the yard to larger offices. A ration receipt named the courier, the animal class, the measure given, and the time. A waybill strip noted the stage just completed and the next planned halt. The scribe wrote in Elamite or Imperial Aramaic, depending on district custom. A small stamp sealed the strip to the tablet cord with clay and wax. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, secured the knot. Warm wax gave a faint resin scent near the lamp. Security at posts used light means that fit daily work. A guard watched the gate and scanned the road line. Spare cords, clay, and seals sat ready in case a tie broke. At dusk, hinge pins and latches were checked. Lamps burned with a restrained hiss in shallow bowls. The yard wall cut crosswinds that raised dust. Dogs dozed near the entrance and woke at footfall. Notes on entries and exits stayed brief and neutral on the board. Seasonal plans kept animals sound and time predictable. In summer, staff shifted exchanges to earlier hours and watched heat stress. Shade cloths hung from the lean-to edge. In winter, mounts stood longer in shelter before the next stage. Icy troughs were broken at dawn. Grain portions rose slightly in cold months. When storms closed a pass, the post sent a detour notice sealed and short. Cart drivers and couriers read the same lines at the next halt. Space inside the post followed a fixed, practical layout. The office corner held a board, a reed stylus, a seal case, and standard weights. The storeroom kept sacks on stones, never on bare soil. The stable line faced away from the prevailing wind. A low threshold kept runoff out of the office. A tool rack carried rammers for edge repairs and shovels for ditch clearing. When traffic eased, 2 grooms walked a short reach to clean culvert mouths. Food and gear for staff stayed simple and regular. A small hearth in the office yard warmed a pot and the wax pot. A jar of water sat within arm's reach of the table. A woven mat covered the ledger basket to keep dust off drying tablets. Spoons and a ladle hung from a peg. The sound here was even. Soft stirring, light scraping on clay, and the faint tick of cooling metal. Work went on without rush or pause. Communication between posts kept supplies balanced. A courier carried short lists of grain levels, shoe nails, and cord stock. The next post added its figures and sent the note forward. A district yard near a larger town kept reserves and moved goods along the chain. Where traffic increased during a festival or a levee, extra fodder moved to exposed reaches in advance. Wagon rims clicked over compacted soil. Covers were tied down with even pulls. By the early 5th century BCE, the chain of posts felt continuous along the main corridor. Western sections near Sardis and southwestern sections near Susa showed the same working plan. Intervals matched water and ground, not fixed miles. Some gaps were shorter near difficult slopes, others were longer across open flats. Every post displayed the same clear rules: water first, fodder measured, mounts ready, and records exact. The routine made speed feel safe for animals and staff. Bridges and ferries added small local features to each post kit. Spare pins, wedges, and rope coils hung by the door. A short pole measured river level against a carved notch. A ferry delay board listed typical weights for high and low water. When levels rose, ration times adjusted so mounts did not stand saddled too long. A pole knocked the ferry deck with a dull sound, and then the bank gave a soft slap. The post returned to stillness. Repairs kept edges and entries clean. Grooms trimmed berm breaks where wheels had cut the side. They tamped small patches and brushed grit toward the ditch. They stacked loose stones near the gate for fast fixes. After windstorms, they swept the yard and cleared feet of dust. Manure heaps stood downwind and were moved to field edges on a set day. Flies were kept low with screens and quick removal. The air stayed plain and workable. Animals needed steady checks beyond water and feed. Grooms ran hands along legs and checked tendons for heat. They looked at eyes, nostrils, and coat. Shoes were inspected for loose nails. Where a shoe shifted, the farrier set a nail with 2 quiet taps. The horse stood calm under the lean-to roof. When a mount showed fatigue beyond a single rest, it shifted to light cart work for a period. Records marked each change and the expected return to courier duty. Training shaped uniform habits from post to post. New grooms learned halter knots, watering intervals, and grain measures. They practiced quick saddle changes without dropping straps. They learned to step aside for the next rider at the tie rail. Scribes learned the receipt format, the seal order, and the copy routine. Managers drilled gate checks and after-dark procedures. Nothing flashy entered the plan. The aim stayed clear: a fast, safe exchange with clean records. Documents tied routine to oversight. The Persepolis fortification tablets, dated mainly 509-494 BCE, preserve ration entries for people and animals tied to road use. They record flour, wine, and fodder in measured amounts. The tone of those lines is calm and exact. Post copies likely match that tone. A name, a measure, a stage, and a seal mark appear. The tablet dried near the lamp, edges firm. The strip slid into the file basket in order. At night, the post stayed ready for late riders. Lamps marked the rail and the office table. The well curb showed a pale ring under flame. Leather creaked softly as grooms checked straps. Dogs shifted once, then settled. The wind crossed the yard wall with a low run. When hoofbeats entered, the steps repeated without change. Check the seal, water in turns, measure the ration, switch the mount, note the time, and open the gate. The quiet returned as the rider left. The relay system turned distance into dependable time. Water stood where it was needed. Fodder sat measured and dry. Fresh mounts waited under shade with clean tack. People moved through short, practiced tasks. Bucket splash and grain rustle stayed as the main sounds. From post to post, the plan held. The road felt continuous because each yard worked the same way, at the same steady pace, across the wide ground. Large rivers crossed the main corridor in the 5th century BCE. The Halys in Anatolia and the Euphrates and Tigris in Mesopotamia stood among the largest. Regular routes formed at selected crossing points where banks were firm and approaches were safe. The system used 2 main tools: ferry boats and timber bridges. Choice depended on channel width, depth, current, and season. Managers matched the tool to the river and kept the same careful records. Pole knocks and shallow wake slaps sounded under plank decks. A ferry site began with shaped landings on both banks. Crews graded gentle ramps and armored them with flat stone. A turning pad above each ramp gave space for carts and animals. Posts with ring bolts held mooring ropes. A small shed stored poles, pegs, spare oars, and pitch for seams. A depth staff stood near the waterline to mark level changes. Sounds here stayed even: a rope creak, a bucket pour, and a soft scrape of plank on curb. Ferries followed 2 simple designs. A pole ferry used long pushing poles in slower water. The crew set poles on the bed and walked hands along in steady rhythm. A cable ferry used a stretched rope or chain to guide the boat across. The rope ran between tall posts, and a traveler ring slid along it. The crew pulled the boat by hand or set the rudder to use the current. Both forms relied on plain tools, trained steps, and short, repeated commands. Loading moved through a fixed order for safety and speed. People boarded first and stood along the side benches. Pack animals followed and were tied to rail rings. Carts rolled on last, with wheels chocked by wooden wedges. The ferrymen checked balance and closed the chain at the entry. A groom kept animals calm with light rein pressure. When all stood fast, the crew pushed off. A pole knocked the deck with a blunt sound. The hull moved with a shallow slap against the bank. Boat hulls used joined planks and internal ribs. Seams were caulked with fiber and sealed with pitch. Crossbeams supported a flat deck strong enough for carts. Rail posts rose to hand height and carried rings for ties. An oar set at the stern worked as a steering sweep. In some places, a small awning covered the center. The air held a light pitch scent near the seams. Footsteps on wood stayed regular and plain. Timber bridges served narrower or more stable channels. Builders set abutments, the end supports of a bridge, on firm banks. Between them, they raised trestles, support frames of posts and braces, standing in the channel. Each trestle carried a cap beam that held deck stringers. Planks ran across to form the roadway. A shallow curb kept wheels centered. Light rails gave a guide for people on foot. Where piles were needed, crews drove them with a drop weight from a simple frame. Construction took advantage of low water months. Crews marked the line with stakes and tested bed firmness with rods. On shallow bars, they stacked stone mattresses to resist scouring. In deeper runs, they worked from rafts and small barges. After posts were set, braces fixed the frames against current. A frame could open a short passage for drift. Decking went on last, with pegs or wooden pins locking boards. Hammers rang sharp against hardwood, then fell quiet. Maintenance was constant and small in scale. Staff cleared driftwood at trestles after high water. They tightened rope lashings and replaced worn pegs. They checked deck planks for movement and swapped cracked boards. A sounding pole tested beaching depth at ferry ramps. A gauge notch on the bank showed a flood mark for past seasons. Notes on change limits appeared on a board near the landing. The board kept wait times in order during busy days. Guards and clerks worked both banks. A modest hut held an office table, seal case, and drying board. A guard watched the approach and kept the queue even. Couriers on official mounts moved forward when called, then cleared quickly. A clerk wrote receipts for rations or ferry use, depending on local rule. The language matched the district. Elamite in southwestern centers. Imperial Aramaic along many corridors. Seals closed the strips. Warm wax gave a faint resin scent near the lamp. The Halys crossing in central Anatolia became a known point on the west-east line. Banks there rose firm above a controlled channel. Sources from classical writers described a bridge at the Halys in some periods. Archaeology suggests timber structures were common, where stone spans were rare. The road approached on compacted ground and widened before the entry. Guards stood at both ends, and a depth staff marked seasonal change. The deck thudded softly under hooves. Water slid under planks with an even sound. Mesopotamian crossings followed the same plain logic while serving larger rivers. On the Euphrates, ferries connected banks near towns where the current slowed. On the Tigris, landings favored inside bends with calmer water. Boat crews timed pushes between short gusts. Rope rubbed the ring with a regular rasp. As the prow touched, a groom steadied an animal and led it forward. Carts rolled down the ramp once the wedge blocks were removed. The shore gave a soft crunch under wheels. Operations adjusted by season without changing the method. In spring, meltwater raised levels and added minutes to each trip. Staff moved marker posts higher and tied landlines farther back. In summer, lower water brought sandbars near ramps. Crews trimmed bars with shovels and marked new lanes with poles. In autumn, steady flow made the easiest months. In winter, ice formed in northern reaches and stopped ferries on a few days. Tablets noted these blocks and the detours in short lines. Approach roads helped keep the process smooth. Builders laid stone on wet patches and raked gravel toward the center. Shallow ditches caught runoff and led it to the side. On bridge causeways, small retaining walls kept the fill in place. A roller or a line of rammers pressed the last layer before opening. Signs at the entry set order: people first, then animals, then carts. Staff followed the same list every time. Voices stayed low and brief. Animals needed plain care at crossings. Grooms watered mounts in short turns before boarding. Hooves were checked for stones after each trip. On bridges, handlers kept animals to the center and held even spacing. Sand or fine gravel on planks reduced slipping in damp air. At landings, feed stood ready for tired animals. Measured portions kept bellies settled before the next stage. Grain moved in a dry hiss into shallow pans. The yard stayed calm. Traffic peaks created cues that the system could absorb. Festival seasons and levee movements raised numbers for a set period. The office posted extended hours and drew extra water from cisterns. Reserve fodder moved from district yards in advance. Second boats entered service on long days. Bridge guards opened both directions in fixed intervals. Lamps marked the edges after dusk. The water's hush remained the main sound, with pole knocks now and then. Repairs after floods followed a clear list. Staff walked trestles and checked braces. They replaced any bent pins and lifted planks to clear silt. They swept gravel back to the center on approach ramps. They built new fenders to deflect drift before the next rise. The clerk added a short line to the maintenance tablet and pressed a seal. Tools went back to racks, and spare pins returned to covered boxes. The site returned to stillness. Documents tied these crossings to the wider road system. Waybills recorded arrival times at the river, wait times, and departure times. Receipts showed rations for boat crews and guards. Detour notices used the same clear format with dates and place names. Copies traveled both directions to keep posts aligned. When a crossing closed for a day, the stage list shifted by a small amount. A new strip on the board showed the revised count. The method stayed plain and exact. Across the 5th century BCE, these practices made wide water passable in a regular way. Ferries worked where the channel was deep or wide. Timber bridges stood where the bed and banks allowed frames. Guards held order without display. Clerks wrote brief lines and sealed them. Staff used poles, ropes, planks, and pitch. The river added steady sounds to the road. A pole knock, a shallow wake slap, and the quiet run along a bank. The corridor continued on the far side with the same measured pace. Guard posts along the road were plain, useful places with fixed routines. The 5th century BCE saw regular detachments at bridges, passes, and storeyards. Their task was not spectacle, but order, keep traffic moving and supplies secure. Surviving records suggest routine patrols in sensitive stretches and regular checks at night. Oil lamps hissed softly in sheltered corners, while leather straps creaked during gear checks. Hoof taps and low voices stayed even. The tone matched the road, measured, predictable, and recorded. A typical post used materials close at hand and a compact ground plan. Builders raised a short wall and a simple palisade, a fence of upright stakes. A gate opened toward the road with a view of the approach. Inside stood a yard, a lean-to roof, and a small room for records. Lamp niches sat near the door to shield flames from wind. A brazier, a metal pan for charcoal, warmed hands during cold months. The site favored solid footing and a nearby water point. Staffing was light and practical for daily demands. A post leader handled seals, rosters, and brief reports. 2 to 6 watchmen covered the day in turns, with 1 or 2 grooms for mounts. A scribe kept tablets and copied essential lines. Where traffic ran heavy, a second scribe or farrier joined the team. The group stayed small enough to move quickly, yet large enough for patrols. Roles were clear, and tools were kept within easy reach. Daily rhythm kept the post predictable for staff and travelers. At dawn, watch changed, lamps were trimmed, and approaches were scanned. The scribe checked the board, then prepared space for receipts. Midday brought water runs, fodder measure, and a short inspection of straps. Dusk returned to gates, hinges, and a quiet look over stores. After dark, watches narrowed to key points, bridge ends, yard corners, and the road bend. Oil lamps burned low and steady during these hours. Equipment was simple and maintained in small steps. Spears, bows, and round shields hung on pegs under cover. A composite bow, wood bound with horn and sinew, received careful drying after damp nights. Quivers stayed closed unless on patrol. Torches lay ready near the gate, with spare wicks and oil jars at hand. A horn and a small handbell provided short signals. Leather was rubbed with oil to avoid cracks. Every item returned to the same peg. Bridges demanded special attention because flow and load changed each day. Guards watched the queue, kept weight even, and checked deck planks. They stood near trestle entries during high water and scanned for drift. A pole knocked softly as ferrymen pushed off below, and wakes tapped the bank. On windy days, shield edges pushed sand aside near the planks. Notes on delays went onto a small board for riders and carts. The information eased pressure across the span. Passes received steady patrols along short, repeatable loops. Patrols walked to the saddle, checked cairns, and looked for edge breaks. They listened for rockfall after rain and for cart rattle on loose gravel. If they saw small damage, they marked it and returned with tools. A broom shifted grit from the center toward the ditch. A rammer firmed small patches before traffic increased. The loop ended back at the gate with a short entry on the tablet. Store yards tied posts to rations and repair supplies. Sacks of grain and fodder sat on stone pads, not bare earth. Seals closed doors and cord knots on lids. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, held impressions from 2 offices. Guards checked seal edges at each watch change. If a seal cracked from heat or handling, the scribe noted it calmly. The door then received a new cord and a fresh impression under 2 witnesses. Interaction with travelers followed a brief, consistent order. Couriers showed permit tablets and seal marks, then moved forward without delay. Cart drivers waited in lines marked with stones, entering when signaled. Animal handlers tied mounts at rails during checks and water turns. Guards kept voices low and steps even. When disputes appeared, the post leader read the receipt and pointed to the board. A short mark on the tablet closed the exchange and preserved the time. Night practice relied on light control and quiet movement. Lamps burned in niches to reduce wind and glare. Wicks were trimmed with small pins to keep an even flame. A shield rested near each lamp to block sudden drafts. Leather straps creaked softly when watchmen shifted gear across shoulders. The gate latch seated with a dull click after checks. Sound stayed low. lamp hiss, short footfalls, and a distant dog shift near the road. Patrols moved by a roster that matched terrain and traffic. The list showed who walked the bridge, who checked the pass, and who watched the yard. Intervals shortened during festivals or levee movements. Sensitive zones, like steep approaches or narrow decks, always received extra passes. The aim remained steady movement rather than force. A regular presence discouraged crowding and kept records clean. The roster repeated each week with small seasonal changes. Communication linked posts and reduced uncertainty for everyone. A runner carried short slips with wait times, water levels, and detours. A seal closed the knot on each slip. The next post copied key lines, sealed a reply, and sent both directions. Scholars suggest signal fires marked larger notices across hilltops in some regions. When used, watchmen fed small beacons with dry fuel and kept flame low. The signals were brief and rare, not nightly routine. Records tied the work to district offices and ration lists. The scribe wrote in the local administrative script, often Elamite in southwestern centers. Some corridors used Imperial Aramaic for clarity across groups. The tablet listed watch changes, rations issued, and any short incident lines. A stamp sealed the edge over a cord. The clay dried near a lamp with a gentle hiss. The copy went forward at dawn on the first cart or courier mount. Weather shaped how guards use the same plan in different seasons. In winter, snow and ice narrowed the deck and slowed steps. Guards broke thin ice at troughs and spread sand on plank approaches. In spring, meltwater raised levels and sent drift toward trestles. In summer, heat shifted watches earlier and kept shade cloths over rails. In autumn, dry air improved footing and kept lamps clean. The roster expanded or contracted, but the method remained steady. Tools for minor repairs stood ready inside the gate. A shovel, a broom, a rammer, and a timber dog hung on hooks. Spare pins and wedges sat in covered boxes near the door. After heavy traffic, guards tamped berm breaks and brushed grit toward ditches. After windstorms, they swept the yard and checked hinges. The target was not a grand rebuild. The target was a usable surface and a safe queue until maintenance teams arrived. Animals also guided the guard routine in simple ways. Post grooms watched mounts for heat, chill, or strain during holds. Water arrived in turns to avoid sudden chill after long efforts. Grain was measured rather than heaped to prevent gut trouble. Hooves were checked for lodged stones after bridge crossings. A dull file stroke smoothed a small edge if needed. Notes on unfit animals moved back to relay posts quickly. Security stayed calm and practical, even when trouble pressed closer. When theft risk rose in a festival week, watches overlapped at dusk. Guards stood at both deck ends to keep carts moving. The scribe wrote brief lines, never long stories. If someone interfered with seals or cords, the door remained closed and a notice moved forward. No spectacle followed. The road regained its usual pace within the hour, with records precise and short. Interior space supported quiet, repeatable work. The record room held a table, a reed stylus, and a small seal case. A lamp sat on a flat stone to steady the base. Drying boards leaned near the wall. Water jars stood at a reach, capped against dust. A rack stored cloaks, spare sandals, and rolled mats for brief rests. Each item returned to the same place after use. Things were easy to find in poor light. Training produced uniform habits across far districts. New watchmen learned gate checks, line order, and plank inspection. They practiced lamp trimming and latch checks at dusk. They learned how to note a broken seal without blame or conjecture. They drilled short signals with horn and handbell, They paced patrol loops and counted steps between waypoints. After instruction, their movements matched the schedule with little correction. Anchors for this picture sit in several sources and places. The Persepolis fortification tablets, mainly 509-494 BCE, record rations for people and animals tied to road use. Classical writers described watch at bridgeheads and steady royal couriers. Archaeology finds small guard installations near passes across several regions. The combined evidence suggests routine presence rather than heavy garrison. The impression is plain: posts, patrols, receipts, seals, and lamps at measured intervals. Night closed with the same ordered sounds and small lights. Oil burned in shallow bowls while wicks showed small glowing tips. Leather straps creaked as watches changed positions on the schedule. A latch settled, then went quiet. A horn rested on its peg, and a shield leaned against the wall. The road continued past the gate with even hoofbeats. Records on the table dried to a firm surface, edges sharp under steady lamplight. Itineraries, stage lists with brief notes, organized movement across the road system. In the 5th century BCE, guides recorded where travelers could stop with water, shade, and space. Entries named springs, groves, and caravan grounds in plain, repeatable terms. Distances followed day stages instead of fixed miles because animals and terrain set the pace. Notes fit on small tablets or waxed wooden boards. The writing stayed compact for quick copying at relay posts. Wind moved through tamarisk, and pack bells clicked at each planned halt. The purpose of a day stage was simple and practical. It matched the reach that people and animals could complete in light hours. On open ground, a common stage neared 30 kilometers, about 20 miles. In hills, the number dropped to protect loads and hooves. A guide considered slope, wind, and water to set each reach. Staging stayed flexible by season without losing its shape. The method valued predictability more than speed. Staff along the line used the same numbers. Waypoints gave the itinerary its stable anchors. Springs offered dependable water and a clear landmark. Groves offered shade, fuel, and a windbreak. Caravan grounds offered flat space, tether points, and room for carts. When nature gave no clear mark, staff built small cairns or set-cut stones. Posts sometimes carried simple signs for staff use. The list named only features that lasted through years. Travelers matched what they saw to what the tablet described. Guides and scribes worked together to produce and update lists. A guide walked or rode the reach and confirmed each feature. A scribe wrote in Elamite or Imperial Aramaic, depending on district routine. The scribe kept lines short and avoided ornament. Distances were counted by steps or grouped into known units. A seal impression closed the board or tied strip. Copies moved to the next post with the first courier. The reed stylus scratched lightly on clay. Springs received careful description because they varied by season. The list noted flow strength, basin shape, and approach width. It said whether animals could drink from the edge or needed a trough. If a spring ran low in late summer, the note explained how far to the backup well. Crews kept a small apron of stone around heavy-use sources. Buckets knocked softly on a curb during morning turns. A shallow overflow line led away to a soak pit. Groves appeared on lists when they served more than shade. A grove might mark a split toward a local market path. It might offer dry twigs after rain when brush stayed damp. Staff trimmed lower branches for clearance above carts. The itinerary named the grove type if useful, such as poplar or tamarisk. The term guided expectations for shade and wood. Wind moved leaves with a steady rasp. The ground stayed firm under long, thin shadows. Caravan grounds carried the most detail after springs. A ground needed space for animals, carts, and cooks' fires. The list stated entry direction, tether line location, and nearest water. It reported soil firmness after heavy rain. Staff placed stones to guide carts into rows. Rope rings stood on posts at even spacing. A low wall cut crosswinds on exposed flats. At dusk, small fires hissed quietly, and pack bells clicked as animals settled. Copying kept all posts aligned with current facts. When a guide returned, the scribe made 2 to 4 copies, depending on traffic. 1 copy stayed on the office board. 1 moved forward with a courier. Another moved backward to the previous post. In busy seasons, a 4th copy went to a district yard. The seal case came out for each strip. Warm wax gave a faint resin scent near the lamp. Drying took little time in warm air. Layout stayed familiar so anyone could read it fast. Each stage began on a new line with a short place name. A second phrase noted the feature, spring, grove, or ground. A third mark showed special points, like a ferry or gate. The final mark showed the season set, if different from the usual. Lines rarely ran long. Clerks avoided comment. The format looked the same from western plains to upland passes. That sameness reduced errors in hard weather. Seasonal versions existed where conditions changed. A spring might be strong in spring and thin in late summer. An exposed saddle might close in winter snows. A ferry weight might double in flood weeks. The itinerary carried 2 or 3 small variants with clear labels. Staff lifted the correct strip into view at the post. A low horn note sometimes announced the switch at dusk. The plan changed quietly, then returned to routine. Between upland passes and western plains, ground types shifted often. The plateau offered firm soils with wide sight lines. The passes narrowed, then opened to rolling lands near the coast. Guides used groves near plains towns and springs near high saddles. In places, tamarisk marked shallow water tables on broad fans. The wind made a steady sound through thin branches. Pack bells clicked at a slow rate as animals kept even spacing. Animals set the fine points of each plan. Horses moved fast, but needed water on a schedule. Donkeys walked slower, but handled poor ground without strain. Ox carts saved energy on descents, but lost time on soft fill. A day stage brought these needs into one reach. The itinerary aimed to keep teams together through the day. Ration tables matched that aim. Grain rustled into pans at the same fixed hours. Relay posts used itineraries to shape service. Managers looked at the next 2 stages and planned water and fodder. Grooms prepared mounts at set times based on the list. Guards watched for bunching on bridge approaches and shifted the queue order. Scribes added any delay notes to the board line. When traffic rose in festival weeks, ration measures stayed accurate because the stages were known. The system held its form under greater load. Maintenance teams also relied on these lines. After storms, crews walked a stage and checked culverts, ditches, and berms. They used the list to record exact spots for repair. 300 steps beyond the spring, the scribe might write. A broom brushed grit from the center toward the sides. A rammer set a small patch before traffic increased. The record returned to the office board with a seal. Travelers learned to read the same cues without needing a long lesson. A thin line of tamarisk meant shallow water and firm ground. A poplar grove meant deeper soil and possible damp after rain. A low stone-lined basin meant a worked spring with clear edges. A tight cluster of post holes meant a regular caravan ground. These simple signs matched the flat statements on the strip. Confidence rose when ground and line agreed. Documents preserved some of this routine for modern study. The Persepolis fortification tablets, mainly 509-494 BCE, record rations tied to stages and halts. Classical writers describe named stops on long routes toward the west. Archaeology shows prepared grounds, worked springs, and waymarks across several regions. The picture that emerges is calm and methodical. It favors repeatable cues, short lines, and small tools over display. Work at the list table stayed quiet and exact. The scribe kept a reed stylus, a flat board, and a small seal case. A lamp stood on stone to steady the base. Water jars sat within reach, capped against dust. Fresh strips lay near the left hand, copies stacked on the right. The stylus made small, regular scratches. When the seal pressed a clay tie, edges held clean lines. The pack bell clicks outside kept time. Guides used simple measuring habits to confirm distances. They counted steps between fixed features. They checked pace length on firm ground at the start of each season. They used cords and rods where straightness mattered. They measured time by sun height and shadow. A gnomon, a vertical stick for tracking the sun's shadow, set local noon. When entries returned from the field, the scribe added figures without comment. The format remained unchanged. Detours appeared as slim additions rather than long debates. If a flood covered a ford, a short branch line showed the ferry and wait. If a rock fall narrowed a saddle, a shift in order marked one by one passage. If a spring failed, the backup well appeared with a distance note. Detours kept labels clear until the main line returned. After work crews finished, the branch was removed from the board. The seal case closed with a soft click. Caravan grounds showed a routine at dusk that matched the page. Animal lines formed at regular angles to the wind. Tethers stayed the same length for even spacing. Water moved in buckets and turns until breathing eased. Grain portions matched the measure on the tablet. Fires stayed low and narrow to save fuel. Voices stayed low as well. The only strong sounds were short blows on a file and the click of bells as animals shifted feet. In the morning, teams left on a set rhythm. The itinerary guided who started first and who waited. Couriers left early to test the next stage time. Carts left when the approach path cleared. Animal handlers checked hooves and straps in the same order. Guards counted groups at the exit stones. The list at the board matched the order on the ground. Wind moved through tamarisk again. Pack bells clicked in a slow, even pattern. Across the 5th century BCE, this way of listing and moving kept the corridor steady. Springs, groves, and grounds were the working language of the road. Day stages balanced light, water, and animal strength. Clerks copied short lines that anyone could read. Guides confirmed features and adjusted by season. Relay posts and guards used the same entries to plan. The road felt continuous because each line stayed clear and each halt matched the line. By the mid-5th century BCE, inns and yard compounds appeared at intervals along uplands and riverlands. Each site offered a walled courtyard, roofed corners, a low hearth, and small rooms for storage. The plan served people, animals, carts, and records without excess. Entry faced the road for easy turns. Troughs stood near the gate. Feed bins stood under shade. Hearth smoke hung low in calm air, and quiet spoon taps marked evening meals. The mood stayed plain and workable across long stretches of ground. Courtyard layouts followed a simple, repeatable pattern. A stout gate opened to compacted soil or a flagstone strip. Stables lined one side under a lean-to roof. Opposite stood the hearth room and a small office. Short storage rooms closed the far end, with a corner reserved for tools. Walls were mud brick in the plateau and timber framed in wetter reaches. Window openings stayed small to limit drafts. Hinges gave a dull click, and door bars slid with a low scrape. Water stood at the center of daily use. Where the water table lay high, builders dug a lined well with a curb. In drier ground they relied on a cistern fed by roof channels or a cannet, an underground water channel. Ramps led animals to troughs set slightly below curb height. Overflow ran to a shallow soak pit beyond the yard. In frost, a wooden lid covered the curb between draws. Jar glugs and bucket pours formed a regular sound near the entry. Hearths were low and steady, built for broth, porridge, and hot water. A clay oven baked flat loaves and warmed the room. Iron hooks, clay pots, and a flat pan covered most needs. Staff kept a small stock of barley, lentils, onions, and salt. A ladle rested on a stone near the fire. Spoon taps sounded gently against bowls, and steam drifted toward the vent. The room's heat also softened wax for seals when the office needed a mark. Winter rooms made cold halts safe and predictable. Thick walls, low ceilings, and small vents held warmth. Floors used reed mats or packed earth under woven covers. Low benches edged the walls. Rolled bedding stored on pegs stayed dry. A brazier, a metal pan for charcoal, helped at dawn and after dusk. Lamps stood in niches to shield the flame from drafts. Oil burned with a soft hiss. The air warmed slowly and stayed even through the night. Storage rooms protected feed, tools, and small repairs. Bins held chopped straw and barley cakes under covers. Sacks rested on stones rather than bare soil. A rack carried rammers, shovels, brooms, and a timber dog for moving beams. A scale and standard weights sat on a shelf for measured issues. Doors closed with cords and clay. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, carried seal impressions at the knot. Edges dried firm near a lamp. Stables supported short rests and overnight holds. Tie rails alternated with small stalls, so handlers could sort animals by temper and load. Bedding used straw or reed in dry seasons and rushes in wet seasons. A farrier kept a small kit, files, nails, and a light hammer. Hooves were picked after long stages and before early starts. Leather tack dried on pegs under the eave. Grain rustled into shallow pans, and animals breathed in slow, even rhythm. Documents connected each inn to the wider road system. The office kept a board for rules, stage notes, and wait times. Receipts recorded fodder and meals issued to staff and travelers under set measures. Permit tablets for couriers received quick checks at entry. Scribes wrote in Elamite or Imperial Aramaic, depending on district custom. A small stamp sealed strips to cords with clay and warm wax. The faint resin scent mixed with hearth air without bitterness. Daily rhythms stayed calm and repeatable. Before sunrise, staff drew water, trimmed lamps, and swept grit toward the ditch. Animals drank in turns, then feed portions were measured. Hearth work began with boiling water and simple porridge. The office copied notices if messages had arrived overnight. Midday brought gear checks, hoof inspections, and a walk to clear the culvert mouth outside the gate. Evening returned to spoon taps, low talk, and the soft scrape of bowls. Seasonal changes altered steps without breaking the plan. In summer, shade cloths hung from roof edges, and water draws increased at set hours. Sand or fine gravel spread on smooth stone reduced slipping near troughs. In autumn, Dry air improved floor curing and kept smoke passages clean. In winter, lids covered troughs between turns, and grain allotments rose slightly. Snow screens at the gate cut wind across the yard. Frost lifted with slow sun, then work resumed. Kitchen stores matched short menus and steady demand. Barley and wheat flours stood in covered jars. Lentils, onions, dried greens, and pressed cheese appeared often. Salted fish reached inland posts by planned carts. Oil and date syrup supplied heat and sweet. Measures remained round and predictable. A scoop left a clear hollow and returned to the same hook. The ladle struck a pot rim with a light ring. No lavish spreads appeared, only warm, filling fare. Sleeping arrangements were plain and orderly. In winter rooms, low benches and mats served small groups. In mild months, travelers spread bedding in roofed corners of the yard. Hooks kept bags and tools off the floor. Lamps marked paths to the gate, the trough, and the hearth. The watch checked flames at set intervals. Wick tips were trimmed with a pin to keep smoke low. Leather straps creaked when handlers shifted gear for the next stage. Linkages to relay stations and guard posts were close and practical. A courier arriving at dusk could exchange a mount at the relay yard next door, then return for a brief meal. Guards checked the gate and posted wait times at bridges or ferries ahead. The innkeeper kept spare pegs, wedges, and cord for cart repair. A broom and rammer stood ready for edge fixes after busy days. The line between posts, yards, and inns felt short and clean. Materials suited local weather and supply. In the plateau, mud brick walls with reed thatch shed short rains and held heat. In riverlands, timber frames with plank cladding dried quickly after flood air. Stone footings kept rot off lower courses. Roofs pitched just enough to clear water. Door thresholds sat slightly high to block runoff. Drains led to a shallow ditch beyond the wall. A rake cleared leaves with a soft scrape after wind. Maintenance followed a quiet calendar. Plaster skins were renewed before winter storms. Thatch ties were tightened at the end of the dry season. Trough rims were checked for cracks and sealed with lime mix. Tool handles were rubbed with oil to resist splitting. Culverts were cleared after each heavy rain. The office reviewed weights and replaced any that chipped. Notes on each task went to a small tablet with a seal mark. Fees and supplies were handled in plain terms. Inns charged modest rates for floor space, meals, and fodder. State lists sometimes covered couriers and guards, shown by seals on strips. Traders bartered spare rope, nails, or cloth for hot meals. Local farmers sold hay and straw by season under set measures. A simple chest held coin and sealed receipts. A lock pin slid with a dull tap. Inventory lines stayed short and exact. Hygiene stayed practical and regular. Hand basins stood near the hearth door with a ladle and a drain. Sweepings moved to a pile beyond the wall each evening. Manure heaps stood downwind and shifted to fields on set days. Fire ash cooled in a pit lined with stone. Smoke passages were brushed on a weekly rotation. Water jars were capped when not in use. The yard smelled of hay, warm grain, and low hearth smoke rather than rot. Lighting came from oil lamps and small hearth flames. Lamps rested in wall niches and on flat stones to steady the base. Wicks were linen twists set to give low, even light. A horn shade near entries reduced glare and shielded the flame from drafts. After dusk, paths were marked with 3 small lights: gate, trough, and office. Oil burned with a soft hiss. Shadows stayed shallow and did not hide steps or tools. Noise stayed within narrow bounds to protect rest and order. Spoon taps, low talk, and a short file stroke from the farrier were the loudest sounds. pack bells clicked as animals shifted under the eave. A jar gave a soft glug when tipped. A gate bar slid with a measured scrape. At intervals, wind moved through tamarisk at the fence line. The pattern remained the same across many sites and long months. Regional examples show the plan in use. Western stretches toward Sardis favored timber roofs over stone bases. Southwestern stretches toward Susa used mud brick rooms with deep eaves. Riverland inns raised floors slightly to clear damp and set reed mats for airflow. Upland inns stacked windbreak walls and stored extra fuel. Differences stayed within a shared framework: courtyard, roofed corners, low hearths, and storage rooms with seals. Written anchors point to this quiet network. The Persepolis fortification tablets, dated mainly 509–494 BCE, record rations for people and animals tied to road stages. Classical writers described hospitable halts along the west-east corridor. Archaeology finds worked springs, yard walls, ovens, and troughs at intervals. Together, they show a system made for routine. The inn gave shelter, the yard gave order, and the winter room gave warmth until morning. Morning routines started the cycle again. Lamps were trimmed and covered. The hearth received fresh fuel. Water drew in turns to avoid rush at the trough. Feed was measured and tack checked. The office posted the stage line and any ferry note. Hoofbeats moved toward the gate in even pairs. Hearth smoke hung low while quiet spoon taps sounded once more. The road resumed its measured pace toward the next listed halt. Passport tablets were short, clear notes carried by authorized officials and couriers. They granted passage, rations, mounts, or shelter at named posts along a route. Examples appear in archives near Persepolis during about 509–494 BCE. The notes existed on clay or on prepared parchment sheets. Clerks wrote in Elamite or Imperial Aramaic, depending on the office. A seal confirmed the issuing authority and secured any tie or fold. The packet fit a hand or small pouch. Oil lamps hissed softly while clerks pressed marks. Warm wax gave a faint resin scent. Clay passports began as small pads shaped from fine, clean clay. A clerk kneaded the clay, then pressed it flat on a board. Typical sizes reached a hand's length, near 7 by 5 centimeters, about 3 by 2 inches, though shapes varied. The surface was smoothed with a damp fingertip. A reed stylus cut short signs in careful rows. Lines named the bearer, the issuing office, and the entitlements allowed. The tablet dried in air or near a mild hearth. Edges were handled gently until fully set. Parchment passports served where lighter notes were useful or needed faster copying. Parchment was prepared animal skin scraped thin and rubbed smooth. Scribes wrote with a reed pen and ink, then folded the sheet. A cord tied the fold, and wax sealed the knot. The seal impression showed office identity and checked tampering. The folded note resisted smearing in a traveling bag. At a post, the manager read the outer line, broke the seal, and checked inside text. The cord ends stayed with the note for later filing. Seals formed the core of authentication at issuance and inspection. A cylinder seal rolled a design across soft clay. A stamp seal pressed an image down. Both served as signatures for offices, not private ornaments. The seal pattern linked to a registry list kept by administrators. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, could cover a cord knot on a packet or a door. When wax warmed near a lamp, the air carried a light resin scent. The clay cooled to crisp edges. The text on a passport remained brief and functional. A typical clay note named the bearer, such as a courier or inspector. It cited the issuing authority and sometimes the district. It listed what the bearer could receive: fodder for animals, grain, wine, or oil. It named one or more posts where service was valid. Some entries gave a date or season window. The last line often carried a clerk's mark before sealing. The format kept copying quick and errors low. Issuance followed a short, repeatable path inside the office. A requester showed need, such as a message run or a supply check. The scribe prepared clay or parchment according to local custom. A supervising official checked names and amounts, then called for the seal. Wax warmed at a small hearth, and the impression seated the cord or tie. A receipt line entered a ledger or tablet strip with date and purpose. The passport moved to the bearer with a nod, not ceremony. Quiet steps left the room. Relay posts used these notes to match service to clear authority. On arrival, a courier handed the passport to the post manager. The manager read the lines, checked the seal, and compared the mark to a registry board. If text and seal matched, staff issued the listed ration or support. A receipt strip recorded the amount given and the time. The strip received a small seal and dried near a lamp. Bucket pours and grain rustle sounded in the background. Hoof shifts stayed even near the rail. Persepolis archives preserve the quiet routine behind these documents. The Persepolis fortification tablets, mainly 509-494 BCE, record rations for people and animals tied to road service. Entries name officials, list measures, and note dates and places. Some lines imply travel permissions and staged movement. The tone is neutral and exact rather than dramatic. Seals appear in series, showing office identity through repeated patterns. Together, these records demonstrate how a brief note guided many small exchanges without delay. Materials and storage shaped survival in the archive. Clay tablets endured handling and drying well and could be stacked in bins. Parchment notes lasted in files if airing and distance from damp were maintained. Clerks wrapped some folded notes with a protective outer strip. Storage rooms used shelves and baskets, with labels pressed into small tags. Lamps stood on stones to steady bases and reduce smoke. Boards leaned in order by month. The room air felt cool and still. Occasional damage or loss was treated as an administrative task, not an event. If a seal broke in handling, the post manager added a short note. He tied a fresh cord, applied his own mark beside the original, and logged the reason. If text smeared on a wet day, a copy was made and sealed. If a passport went missing, the issuing office entered a cancel line and issued a replacement. The aim was continued movement with clear records. The tone stayed calm. Authority and scope were defined by office and role. Passports served royal couriers, inspectors, store officers, and messengers between satrapal centers. They could also support skilled workers in transit, such as carpenters or seal cutters. They did not turn every traveler into an official client. Merchants usually used market paths and private arrangements. When state cargoes moved by cart, the senior clerk held the packet. Guards read the lines and passed carts according to the entries. Seasonal lines appeared when conditions changed resource needs. In winter, a passport might grant a larger fodder measure due to cold. In summer, it might grant earlier watering times on exposed reaches. During high river weeks, a note could add priority at a ferry. During festival periods, it might point to a specific yard to prevent crowding. These details used few words and relied on the same seals. Post staff followed the lines without added comment. Training kept format and handling uniform across regions. Scribes learned standard openings and closing lines in their script. They practiced neat rows on small surfaces and proper drying times. Seal keepers learned to check edges for slips or double impressions. Managers learned to compare marks against registry boards. Grooms learned to wait for the receipt strip before issuing grain. The chain of small habits made the passport useful at every desk and gate. Other records worked beside the passport to confirm movement. A waybill named departure, route, and planned stages. A ration receipt confirmed what the bearer received at each stop. A guard note recorded bridge or ferry waits. When laid together, the documents matched like short lines in a ledger. Differences were corrected by the next clerk in order. The process remained administrative rather than personal. Lamplight and reed scratches set the pace. Some passports traveled only a short distance and then returned to file. Others remained with a courier for many stages and several days. Parchment folds softened with use, and clay edges showed wear marks. When an assignment ended, the note went back to the issuing office. A clerk checked lines against receipts and waybills. He placed the finished packet on a board to dry if damp, then shelved it. The archive gained one more small piece of settled work. Seals tied the end of each task back to the start. A clear impression linked the traveler's hand to a specific desk. Patterns ranged from simple figures to more complex scenes, but served the same role. The seal registry matched each pattern to a named office and period. When offices changed hands, a new seal pattern entered the list. Old impressions stayed readable in the file for years. A light brush removed dust from the surface during checks. The presence of these notes in the Persepolis region helps date practice. The cluster near 509-494 BCE shows a mature method under Darius and his administrators. The pattern likely began earlier and continued later under other rulers. Editors and archaeologists study edges, hands, and impressions to place each piece. For this documentary, the focus remains the clear, simple function. A small tablet authorized movement and supplies along a measured road. Back at a post, the exchange closed with quiet motions. The manager returned the passport, now dry from handling. The scribe set the receipt strip aside to harden. A groom measured fodder and set shallow pans. Animals drank in turns. Then lines moved on. The office lamp hissed softly. The wax pot cooled to a firm surface. The seal case closed with a dull click. The passport rested again in a pouch, ready for the next stage on the road. 5th century BCE offices used two close tools for proof and closure. A cylinder seal was a small engraved stone that rolled a design across soft clay. A stamp seal pressed a design straight down. Both left clear impressions that identified an office or role. A bulla, a clay envelope over a tied string, secured a knot on cords that closed jars, packets, or doors. The roll left crisp ridges, the wax cooled to a dull shine. Lamps burned low while clerks set each mark in order. Seals were small, hard stones shaped for strong edges and steady handling. Common lengths sat near 2 to 4 centimeters, about 1 inch. A fine hole ran through a cylinder so a cord could pass. Some seals hung from the wrist, others rested in a small case. The surface carried lines cut in reverse so the impression read forward on clay. Edges were trimmed to avoid smearing. When rolled, the stone met clay with a dry, faint scrape. The image repeated in an even band. Workshops prepared seals with simple, durable steps. Cutters selected hard stones and shaped them with abrasive sand and water. A bow drill opened the axial hole through a cylinder. Files refined the outline until it turned smoothly under light pressure. Engraving used copper tools and abrasives to cut the design. The cutter tested progress on damp clay and studied the result. A water bowl washed grit from the lines. Fine scraping made a soft whisper while edges were finished. Offices used both cylinder and stamp types, depending on task and speed. Cylinders excelled at long impressions across seams on bully and stoppers. Stamps worked well for quick marks beside entries on tablets or tags. Some desks kept one of each. A chest stored them in fixed slots with a written list of holders. When duty changed hands, the entry updated before a seal moved. A scale of authority appeared in patterns, yet the process stayed the same at every table. Jars and stoppers showed sealing at its most common scale. A cord wrapped a jar neck and tied a square knot. A lump of damp clay covered the knot to prevent a silent untying. The clerk warmed a small bit of wax and smoothed a thin layer over the clay to shed dust. He then rolled the cylinder or pressed the stamp. The impression set in seconds. When dry, the bulla bridged cord and jar and showed if anyone opened the tie. Tablet packets and folded notes used related closures. A stack of small tablets could be tied with cord and covered at the knot with a bulla. The surface took a cylinder roll that crossed onto the cord at both edges. A parchment note folded to a small rectangle received a wax seal on the tie. The wax set fast by the lamp. Offices placed the seal so the strip could not be opened without breaking the mark. Clerks checked the edges before filing or dispatch. Doors and store ties extended the same logic to rooms. A cord ran from the door bar to a fixed ring on the frame. A bulla covered the knot and took the seal. When someone with authority entered, he broke the bulla, opened the door, and recorded the new closure on leaving. Guard posts and store yards used two impressions at once, one from the store office and one from the guard. Two marks showed joint supervision. Night lamps hissed softly as seals cooled on the fresh ties. Registries gave meaning to each pattern. A register board listed each seal, the office, and the current holder. Test impressions on small clay tags sat beside the entries. When an impression appeared at a post, staff compared it to the register. If the image matched and the text aligned, the exchange proceeded. If a seal changed hands due to roll change, a new test tag entered the board. Old tags stayed for reference, dated and filed by month. The chain of custody remained visible. Issuing and guarding seals followed short, steady routines. A seal keeper opened the chest, read the list, and handed the seal to the clerk on duty. The clerk checked edges for chips that might blur the design. A small wax pot warmed near the lamp, and a shallow tray held damp clay. After use, the seal returned to its slot. The chest closed with a pin and cord, then received a small bulla. Its own closure bore an office mark like any other store. Inspection at relay posts and yards relied on calm repetition. A manager looked at the impression and at the register tag. He checked whether the roll crossed cord and clay without breaks. He read the note, then issued fodder or opened a store by entry. If an impression cracked in handling, he added a short line on a receipt strip, retied the cord, and placed his small mark beside the original. The action showed control without halting routine movement. Archives preserve many impressions and the habits around them. In the Persepolis Fortification Archive, dated mainly 509 to 494 BCE, tablets record rations and movements tied to sealed authority. Clay pieces carry rolled bands from cylinders and clear dips from stamps. Some show string marks under the clay, proving that cords were truly covered. Others keep crisp edges, where wax formed a thin protective film. Reading them today shows a practical method: measured entries, secure knots, and regular seals. The seal face bore images, but offices treated them as identifiers, not decoration. Patterns ranged from simple figures to more complex scenes. What mattered was consistency and legibility. A blurred line meant a repair or a replacement. Seal keepers cleaned stones with water and fine grit and dried them before storage. If a chip changed a line, the registry added a note. If damage was serious, the office retired the seal and cut a successor. The new test tag entered the board: season and climate-shaped materials without changing the plan. In summer heat, wax grew soft. Clerks used thinner coats or shaded tables. In winter cold, wax stiffened. The lamp stood closer for a moment before the press. Dusty months asked for more careful cleaning of stones and clay. Damp spells near rivers required longer drying before filing. Lamps used horn shades to protect flames from drafts. Through all months, the sequence remained recognizable at any desk. Training fixed uniform habits across far districts. New clerks learned to roll a cylinder in one smooth pass. They practiced pressing a stamp straight down and lifting cleanly. They learned to seat clay of even thickness over a knot. They learned to place the impression so cord and clay locked together. They wrote short lines beside each task and dried the entry before stacking. The quiet skills reduced errors and made checks fast at busy posts. Sealing connected objects to time as well as to offices. A dated tablet with a seal showed when and under whose authority a ration moved. A door tie with 2 impressions showed who had custody at night. A jar bulla showed the last office to close a store item. When the object moved again, the next clerk compared, noted, and resealed. The linked steps formed a clear path from one room to the next. Reed scratches and lamp hiss set the pace. At the close of a workday, desks returned to a known order. Seals settled into the chest in their numbered slots. The wax pot cooled on a stone. Clay scraps went back to the tray for reuse. The register board leaned against the wall beside the drying rack. The still air held a faint resin scent. Doors received fresh ties with bully where needed. The road system would begin again at dawn, carrying notes and goods, each mark proving its small part in a larger routine. Clerks, in the late 6th and 5th centuries BCE, wrote with 2 main scripts. Elamite served administration in southwestern centers, especially around Persepolis and nearby towns. Imperial Aramaic spread across provinces for notes that moved between regions. Offices used the script that fit their readers and their archives. Clay tablets carried most Elamite entries. Parchment or wooden boards carried many Aramaic notes. Reed stylus scratches mixed with quiet counting in small rooms. Oil lamps burned low on stone bases while tablets dried on slats. Clay tablets formed the steady base for routine accounting. Clay came from local pits and was cleaned by settling in basins. A clerk kneaded a lump and pressed it into a thin pad by hand. The surface was smoothed with a damp fingertip or a small scraper. A reed stylus with a trimmed edge made wedge-like signs. Lines ran in neat rows with even spacing. Finished tablets dried in warm air or near a mild hearth. Boards held them flat while edges set firm. Aramaic notes relied on ink and lighter surfaces. Parchment was prepared animal skin, scraped thin and rubbed smooth. Some districts also used wooden tablets coated with light wax or gesso, a thin plaster-like coating. A reed pen with a split tip carried ink made from soot, gum, and water. Strokes were quick and curved rather than wedge-shaped. Ink dried within minutes near the lamp. Folds or covers protected the surface during travel. Strings and small seals kept sets together inside file baskets. Workrooms kept tools simple and close at hand. A tray held styluses, reed pens, and a knife for trimming tips. A shallow bowl held water for smoothing clay or adjusting ink. Weight sets, scoops, and tallies sat within reach of the scribe. A seal case rested near the board. A drying rack leaned against the wall, with room for several rows. Sounds stayed small. Light reed scratches, a soft brush on clay, and quiet counting to confirm measures. Breezes moved gently through a vent. Elamite entries followed a recognized order that aided quick reading. An opening line named the purpose, such as ration issue or transport. Next came personal names and roles. Animals or goods followed with units and amounts. Place and date closed the tablet. Numbers used round values for easy checking and loading. A clerk read back the lines and pressed a seal at the margin. The tablet lay flat until dry, then slid into a bin labeled by month and office. Aramaic summaries made communication faster across distances. Couriers carried folded slips listing stages, recipients, and measures due. Office copies stayed on boards in the dispatch room. When a slip reached a relay post, a manager read the lines aloud for the scribe. The scribe wrote a receipt on clay for the archive and a short ink note for the traveler. Both took small seals. The pair of formats balanced durability with speed. The process kept movement steady even when posts grew busy. Training produced uniform hands that readers could trust. Apprentices learned sign shapes, stroke order, and spacing before handling records. They practiced numbers and common goods words until lines came naturally. They learned to steady a tablet with the left hand while writing with the right. They learned to keep the pen tips square to the line. They copied model tablets and slips, then joined real work under a senior clerk. The approach favored accuracy and calm pace over flourish. Ration records tied script to daily needs. Entries named flour, wine, oil, and fodder in fixed measures. Animal counts recorded horses, mules, donkeys, and oxen. Waybills added stage names and planned rests. Guard notes added ferry weights and bridge checks. When placed together, the tablets and slips formed a clear chain for each move. The tone remained plain. A measure here, a name there, a date, and a seal. Nothing more was needed to keep the system in line. Counting aids stood between stock rooms and desks. Pebbles in small bowls tracked tens and hundreds during scooping. Knotted strings marked completed bundles for grain or fodder. A notched stick sometimes recorded cartloads before a tablet was ready. When the clerk sat down, the numbers already matched the piles. Quiet counting confirmed the total. The stylus scratched short lines. The seal pressed the edge. The tablet dried, while store doors closed with fresh ties. Calendars and dating varied by office, yet clarity stayed central. Some tablets used regnal years, tied to the ruling king. Others used month and day names common to the region. Winter and summer notations appeared where season changed ration size. The important point was agreement inside a district. Desks used the same format for months, goods, and names. If a list crossed districts, an Aramaic slip translated the key lines. Seals signaled acceptance on both sides. Names shifted across languages, so clerks kept them stable in the record. Elamite forms appeared on clay. Aramaic forms appeared on ink slips. When a person served in more than one area, a parent line carried both forms once. After that, entries used the local script. Titles stayed short: courier, manager, groom, guard, scribe. The restraint reduced confusion at busy rails and doors. A reader could match a face to a line without delay. Storage rooms protected both formats from damp and heat. Clay survived best on shelves with airspace between stacks. Parchment liked baskets and boxes with covers against dust. Lamps stood on stones to steady bases and reduce smoke stains. Doors closed with cords, clay, and seals. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, guarded the knot and carried impressions. periodic airing kept ink from spotting. Boards rotated by month so older items stayed accessible for checks. Corrections followed a steady rule that preserved trust. If a line was wrong on wet clay, the clerk smoothed that section and rewrote it. If a tablet had dried, a new tablet replaced the old with a note of correction. Ink slips used cross marks and a marginal line, then a second slip with the fix. All corrections took a seal. The record showed what changed and when. The method ensured that numbers on the shelf matched goods on the floor. Script choice reflected audience more than prestige. Elamite fit internal administration in southwestern centers. It matched local archives and long habits. Aramaic fit roads that crossed many languages. It allowed quick reading at distant posts. Old Persian monumental script existed for royal inscriptions, but rarely entered this administrative flow. Offices chose the tool that kept work smooth. The roads stayed dependable because the words matched their readers. Examples survive that anchor this picture. The Persepolis fortification tablets, dated about 509–494 BCE, preserve ration and movement records in Elamite. Many carry seals from offices tied to road service. Aramaic notes from similar decades appear across empire sites, often as dockets and letters. Together, they show a bilingual practice serving one system. They show measured language over forceful phrasing. They show careful counting behind each mount, cart, and jar. Sounds in the writing rooms remained narrow and familiar. Reed stylus scratches ran in even bursts across damp clay. Pen tips tapped the rim of an ink cup, then swept a short line. A clerk counted under his breath and moved a pebble in a bowl. A lamp hissed softly as oil fed the wick. A seal case opened with a small click. The room smelled of clay dust, warm oil, and faint resin from wax. Movement never rushed, yet nothing stalled. Copying and dispatch tied desks to the road beyond the door. Morning packets included waybills, ration notes, and route updates. Clay stayed on boards. Ink slips went into corded bundles. Couriers took sets both forward and backward along the line. Relay posts added receipts and returned copies to the district office. When a detour opened or closed, a narrow Aramaic strip announced the change to neighbors. The chain kept short gaps from becoming long delays. Training also covered personal names and place names with care. Clerks learned standard spellings for major towns and districts. They practiced names of satraps and major officials. They kept a small list of variant forms for common persons. When a new name appeared, they confirmed letters with the bearer, if present. If not, they copied from a reference tablet. The aim was simple: a name that matched across months and posts, so records stayed linked. At night, records remained readable in low light. Lamps stood near boards at a set distance to prevent smoke marks. Wicks were trimmed to small flames. A flat stone served as a lamp base to protect shelves. The scribe's hand cast short shadows that did not hide signs. If copying continued after dusk, a second lamp moved to the opposite side for balance. The routine protected eyes and kept lines neat even when days ran long. Scripts also supported audits that kept trust steady. District clerks compared sample tablets to store counts each month. They checked a few ink slips against relay receipts. They matched seals on door ties with register tags. Differences produced small corrections, not blame. A fresh tablet recorded the fix. A dated line noted the reason. The file gained a clear trail. Goods and words met again without strain. The system worked because the writing remained exact. Across these small rooms, language became a tool like any other. It served water draws, fodder issues, ferry waits, and bridge checks. It named people and animals and set times and places. It kept the same tone on busy days and quiet days. Elamite held clay lines for the shelf. Aramaic carried light slips for the road. Reed stylus scratches mixed with quiet counting, while lamps hissed softly. The road's order rested on these steady hands and the simple, repeatable scripts they used. Ration work joined storage rooms, measure tools, and small writing desks. In the late 6th and 5th centuries BCE, southwestern centers used clay tablets to note each allotment. The Persepolis fortification tablets preserved these routine entries across several decades. Lines named the person, the role, the item, and the amount. Messengers, grooms, and animal handlers appeared often. Flour, beer, wine, oil, and fodder formed the usual list. Sack mouth rustle and jar glug marked each measure. The tone stayed plain and even from one season to the next. Storerooms kept goods ready for measured issue. Sack piles stood on low stones to lift them above damp ground. Jars lined shelves by type and volume. A scale with 2 pans hung from a beam. Standard weights lay in a small chest beside scoops. A stool sat near the board for the scribe. A lamp rested on a flat stone to steady the base. Air moved slowly through a vent to keep the room cool and dry. Sound stayed small and useful. Flour was the common ration for people in road service. Barley and wheat were milled to a fine or coarse mix, depending on region. The storekeeper loosened the sack tie and folded the rim back. A wooden scoop filled the bowl to the requested mark. The scribe read the line, then named the measure back with calm voice. Flour slid in a soft stream into a lined bag. The bag closed with cord and a clay tie. A seal pressed the knot flat for the shelf or the hand. Beer and wine rations followed clear rules that matched roles and seasons. In some districts, beer served workers and handlers more often than wine. In others, wine reached couriers and officers on specific days. Jars carried marks for known volumes. A small funnel eased clean pours. Foam rose and settled to an even line. The scribe wrote the jar count and the person's name. Warm wax secured the stopper cord. The seal cooled to dull shine near the lamp. Animal feed stayed central because mounts and draft animals set the road's pace. Fodder included barley, chopped straw, and sometimes cakes pressed from chaff and grain. The storekeeper measured by basket and by weight. Horses received grain in shallow pans to prevent waste. Donkeys and mules ate more slowly and needed less at once. Oxen took coarse feed after cart work. Water troughs stood nearby for measured turns. The scribe added the animal count to the line. Receipts connected hands, amounts, and time with steady clarity. A messenger presented a passport tablet or a slip with seal. The storekeeper checked the mark against the register board. The scribe wrote a receipt line with the item and measure. A small stamp sealed the edge. The tablet dried on a rack while the goods moved out. If the person returned a container, a return mark appeared in the margin. Lines stayed short, exact, and easy to copy. Units and standards kept entries comparable across districts. Piles matched scoops. Scoops matched weight stones. Stones matched the register list. When doubt arose, the scale settled it. The pans touched with a soft ring, then leveled. Clerks preferred round numbers for quick checking and loading. Monthly totals drew from the daily slips without long recalculation. A sample was weighed again during audits. The system reduced argument and kept carts on time. Work roles divided tasks without crowding the room. A storekeeper managed sacks, jars, and the scale. A scribe handled tablets, slips, and seals. A manager compared marks to the registry and watched counts. A groom lifted pans for animal feed and kept the trough line even. A guard checked the door tie and the queue order. The space allowed 2 workers at once near the scale. Others waited at set stations until called forward. The Persepolis fortification tablets anchor this routine in time and place. Many entries date to about 509-494 BCE and name the region's offices. They show flour, wine, and beer issued to couriers, grooms, craftsmen, and guards. They add animals by kind and number. They map movement by listing stages and named locations. They often carry seal impressions from known offices. Their tone is calm, and their numbers are practical. They preserve ordinary work without drama. Corrections and shortages received simple treatment that kept trust in place. If a measure slipped, the storekeeper reset the scoop and reweighed. If a sack tore, the scribe noted a replacement and sealed the new tie. If a jar leaked, the stopper changed, and a margin line recorded the repair. If stocks ran low, a short notice moved to the district yard. The reply showed a cart count and a day stage plan. All notes carried seals and clear dates. Season changes shifted portions while using the same plan. Winter ration lines rose slightly for people and animals because of cold and early dark. Summer lines added water turns and sometimes a small salt issue. Spring and autumn noted mud at approaches and delays at ferries. Staff placed sand on smooth stone near troughs to prevent slips. In each season, the record style stayed the same. The scribe kept numbers exact and words brief. Hygiene and storage discipline protected goods and people. Sweepings went to a pile beyond the wall each evening. Lids covered jars between pores to keep insects out. Sacks rotated forward by date, so old stock moved first. Rodent guards stood at the legs of shelves. The floor stayed dry under reed mats near the scale. Ladles and funnels rinsed after each use. A faint grain scent mixed with lamp oil, never sourness. The room held steady order. Receipts linked to waybills and guard notes outside the store. A waybill named departure and planned stages. A guard note listed ferry waits or bridge checks. The receipt proved the ration that made those stages possible. When a courier reached the next post, the slip matched the entry on the storeboard. A copy moved back with a cart to the district office. Stacks of tablets settled into monthly order. A seal on the cord closed the bundle. Paperwork also guided payments and exchanges with nearby markets. Some inns bought straw and hay from local fields in set months. The store recorded the purchase with weight and price. A coin count or a barter line closed the entry. Traders sold rope or nails in exchange for meals listed at standard rates. The scribe kept these lists separate, but in the same hand. The seal showed the same office mark at the edge. Training taught each step with patient repetition. Apprentices learned scoop sizes, weight names, and jar marks. They practiced lifting a filled pan without shaking the balance. They practiced reading a line back to confirm the figure. They learned to press a seal straight and lift cleanly. They learned safe pouring and tidy bag ties. They shadowed the scribe, then the storekeeper, until movements matched. The pace remained smooth, never rushed. Audits confirmed that shelves and tablets told the same story. Once a month, a clerk weighed a few sacks and jars at random. He matched the result to lines on the board. He checked seals on door ties and compared them to register tags. He opened one bundle of old tablets and sampled past entries. Differences produced a short correction tablet. The fix carried date, reason, and seal. The bundle closed again, and order returned. Rations for special tasks appeared as brief additions rather than new systems. A bridge repair crew received extra oil and grain for long shifts. A ferry team received wine during flood weeks to steady work in cold spray. An inspector received a travel jar set with waxed stopper and a corded bag for flour. Each edition used the usual lines and seals. When the task ended, the list returned to normal. The board never grew crowded. At day's end, the storeroom settled in familiar order. The scale pans rested on hooks. Weights returned to the chest. Scoops hung by size near the wall. The scribe placed drying tablets on the upper rack. The manager tied the door cord and pressed a small bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string. The lamp flame shrank to a point and then was pinched out. The room held a low smell of grain and cool clay. Morning restored the same steady steps without strain. The door tie broke and received a fresh seal. The scribe trimmed the wick and set the lamp on stone. The storekeeper checked sacks and jars against the board. Water filled hand basins for clean starts. The first messenger showed a passport tablet at the entry. The scribe read the name and measure without hurry. Sack mouth, rustle, and jar glug marked each portion. The road's movement began again on measured food and confirmed lines. Across the late 6th and 5th centuries BCE, posts used agreed standards. Many offices aligned measures with reforms linked to Darius and his administrators. The goal was simple: the same amount in every place. A small balance scale, a chest of weights, and a record board stood together. Grain, oil, wine, and fodder passed under the same rules. Clerks trusted tools more than memory. Seals confirmed each step after the weighing. Scale pans touched with a soft ring, then steadied in level air. A staging post kept its scale where light fell cleanly. The beam hung from an iron hook set in a roof beam. Two shallow pans suspended by cords faced one another. A pointer showed when both sides balanced. The weights chest sat on a low shelf beneath. The scribe's board rested to the right, near a lamp on stone. Buckets, scoops, and funnels stayed within reach. The space encouraged quiet motions and short steps. Nothing blocked the path between sack, scale, and shelf. Weights came in matched sets of stone or metal. Common pieces ranged from small pebbles to fist-sized blocks. Bronze and lead weights carried cut marks for quick reading. Stone weights showed incised stripes or simple numerals. Each set followed a base unit that staff understood. Surfaces stayed smooth to avoid catching dust and grain. When lifted, a weight felt cool and steady in the hand. When set down, it made a muted touch on the pan. No rush entered the movement. Calibration kept trust across long distances. Each district held one master set under seal. Monthly, a clerk compared working pieces to the master weights. If a weight differed, the office filed the error and corrected or replaced it. The chest then closed with a cord, clay, and a small seal. The seal impression showed office identity and date. A short line on a tablet recorded the check. The chest returned to its shelf until next use. The routine stayed exact and plain. Units linked posts from Anatolia to southwestern Iran. Many offices counted by shekel, mina, and talent, inherited from older systems. A shekel weighed near 8 grams, about a small coin. A mina counted 60 shekels, near 500 grams. A talent was a large store weight near 30 kilograms. Liquids used capacity jars with marks on the shoulder. In Persian use, an artaba, a large grain and liquid measure, held near 30 liters, about 8 gallons. Round values helped memory and copying. Grain issue showed the full sequence with calm clarity. The storekeeper loosened the sack tie and folded the mouth back. He placed a lined bag on the receiving pan. He set weights on the other pan until the pointer steadied. A wooden scoop filled the bag to the balance point. The scribe read back the amount and wrote the line. A stamp sealed the tablet margin. The tie on the bag closed with clay and wax. The seal cooled to a dull shine near the lamp. Liquids followed a linked but separate routine. Wine and beer moved in marked jars. A funnel and dipper set the level to the shoulder mark. For payments or audits, the jar sat on the scale pan. Weights rose on the other side until balance came. The scribe wrote both the jar mark and the total weight. If stoppers needed wax, the pot warmed at the hearth. The bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, covered the knot. The impression crossed cord and clay for clear control. Road crews used measures during maintenance days as well. Sand and gravel for small repairs were counted by basket and checked by weight. Oil for axle grease received fixed portions. Shoes and nails counted by tens moved in bundles. The board showed each item beside the measure. The same weights that set grain amounts also checked repair stores. After issue, the chest closed again with a small seal. The room returned to quiet order, with tools back on pegs. Registries linked weights and seals, so offices read the same signs. A register board carried test impressions from the seal case. Next to these marks, a narrow list named the current weight set in service. A clerk could match a bulla on the chest to the board at a glance. When duty changed hands, the register added the new name. Old entries stayed as dated lines. The system allowed short checks during busy hours without delay at the door. Audits appeared as regular, low-contrast work. Once a month, a district clerk selected a few posts for sampling. He weighed chosen sacks and jars against the local set. He compared receipts to store counts. He examined seals on chest cords and door ties. If numbers diverged, he wrote a correction tablet. The fix changed scoop sizes or replaced a chipped weight. A seal closed the entry. Later checks referred to this line without debate. Routine returned at once. Training taught hands to keep balance honest and fast. Apprentices learned to lift and place weights without rocking the pan. They learned to read the pointer at true stillness, not mid-swing. They practiced setting scoops aside while the beams settled. They learned to check the knife edge pivot for dust. They learned to set pans level after cleaning. The senior clerk watched posture as much as numbers. Good habits protected fairness and speed together. Care kept tools stable in heat and cold. Pans were wiped after flour dust built up. Knife edges were brushed with a soft fiber to remove grit. Weights dried before storage to prevent moisture gain. In summer, the scale hung away from direct sun. In winter, the lamp stood near, but not under the beam. The goal was the same response to the same load in any season. The room smelled of clean clay, dry grain, and warm oil. Seals completed the chain from measure to record. After weighing, the scribe pressed a small stamp at the tablet margin. If goods went into storage, the chest cord received a bulla over the knot. If goods left the room, the bag tie received clay and wax. The impression served as a signature for the office, not for a person. At the next post, staff compared marks to the registry tag. If edges looked right and lines matched, the roadwork continued. Money weight aligned with measure sets at higher offices. Gold derricks, a royal gold coin standard, followed a known weight near 8 grams. Silver pieces followed linked standards by region. Offices did not count coin often at posts, yet weight thinking matched across goods and coin. A scale that balanced grain also balanced a payment weight during audits. This harmony reduced confusion when taxes or wages crossed district lines. The beam behaved the same in every hand. Volume measures kept pace with weight by clear marks, Jars bore notches or bands at fixed heights. Cork or fiber stoppers held liquid under waxed cord. In some rooms, a dipping rod carried 2 marks for quick checks. The scribe preferred jars with visible bands because copying went faster. When a jar broke, a replacement was measured and marked before service. The board gained a short note of change. The lamp hissed softly while the wax cooled. Field sets supported work away from rooms. A portable scale folded into a small frame. 2 pans nested with cords wrapped tight. A pouch carried a reduced set of weights. Repair crews used these tools on causeways and bridge approaches. They weighed nails and pins at the site and signed a strip. Back at the office, the strip joined the daily bundle. The same standards met the same seals, whether under a roof or in open air. Differences between regions stayed modest and recorded. Western districts preferred bronze weights with cut numerals. Southwestern rooms kept stone pieces with incised stripes. Both matched the district master and the monthly check. Scripts differed, not the balance. An Elamite tablet and an Aramaic slip could carry the same number. A seal from either office spoke clearly to both desks. The road felt continuous because the sums held at every gate. The human pattern around the scale changed little from site to site. The storekeeper handled sacks and weights. The scribe wrote lines and managed seals. The manager watched registers and dates. A guard kept the door clear and quiet. Sounds repeated. A soft ring as pans touched, a scoop scrape, a jar glug, and a seal case click. Movements repeated. Lift, set, watch the pointer, write, and seal. The routine never strained, and nothing surprised the tools. Records from Persepolis and its region confirm this steady language of measure. The fortification series, dated mainly 509-494 BCE, lists amounts with regular units. Many tablets carry seals and short notes on checks. They show measured issues for couriers, guards, craftsmen, animals, and crews. They show corrections in the margin when scoop sizes changed. They show office control by seal on cords and doors. Through these lines, the scale becomes visible again, plain, balanced, and exact. Evening closed the room in the same careful order. Weights returned to their box. Pans rested on hooks to protect cords from strain. The beam hung straight, free of dust and draft. The chest received a cord and a small bulla over the knot. The seal impression settled cleanly on clay and cooled to dull shine. The lamp flame shortened and went still. The scale waited through quiet air for morning light. Work would begin again with the same soft ring on level metal. Across the Achaemenid period, seasons guided work as clearly as scripts did. Winter narrowed passes with snow and ice. Summer stretched days on open flats. Spring and autumn offered mild air and safer footing. Travelers timed long moves to those middle seasons, especially across Zagros foothills. Posts adjusted rations, lamps, and watch lists without changing the method. Breezes carried dust scent and distant herder calls along high paths. The road stayed the same road, yet each month gave it a different face. Winter practice focused on careful steps and warm spaces. Snow reduced width at saddles and hid shallow stones. Crews spread sand or fine gravel on smooth planks near bridges. Lids covered troughs between turns to slow ice. Lamps burned longer at dawn and dusk, with wicks trimmed short. Grain portions rose slightly for people and animals in the cold. Hooves were checked more often after frozen runs. Gate screens cut wind across yard corners. Sounds stayed close. Lamp hiss, short footfalls, and leather strap creaks. Spring eased cold but introduced meltwater and soft ground. Melt-fed streams and filled ditches along approach ramps. Ferries posted longer waits, and bridge guards cleared drift from trestles. Crews opened culverts and brushed silt from outlets. Sand was raked back to the center on causeways where carts had spread it. Itineraries carried small spring variants for fords and marsh edges. A depth staff at landings showed the weekly rise. Water moved with a steady hush under planks. Notes remained brief and exact. Summer required early starts, planned shade, and measured water. Heat slowed animals at midday and dried top layers to loose dust. Posts drew water in regular rounds and set shade cloths along rails. Couriers left before sunrise and rested in roofed corners at noon. Grain fell in smaller, more frequent portions. Salt issues appeared in some districts during the hottest weeks. Sand on smooth stone reduced slipping under sweat. Wind carried dry air through tamarisk at yard edges. Bells clicked while animals stood quiet. Autumn gave the most even days on many reaches. Winds cleared dust and kept surfaces firm. Streams fell to steady levels, easing ferry lines and fords. Repair teams closed small breaks before winter. Farmers along the corridor brought straw and hay to posts after harvest. Managers stacked reserves for cold weeks and sealed chest cords. Itineraries returned to standard versions after summer editions. The room air felt cool and dry. Tools went back to pegs. The pattern looked clear again. The Zagros foothills asked for special timing within this broad plan. Passes climbed toward saddles where wind-cut edges narrow. Spring offered firm soil after thaw and before heavy runoff. Autumn offered clear sight and mild grades. Travelers avoided deep winter here except for urgent moves. Guides named reliable springs and groves on both sides of the ridge. Herding routes crossed near some stages, adding faint bells and soft calls. Breezes moved dust along the slope and then fell still. Riverlands worked with the same rules and different risks. Spring-high water slowed ferries and pressed crews to watch moorings. Cable ferries used strong anchor posts and frequent checks on traveler rings. Pole ferries favored eddies behind bars. Summer lowered levels and opened new bars near ramps. Crews trimmed approaches and marked lanes with poles. Autumn steadied flow and shortened queues. Winter brought ice in rare spells, then clear water again. Pole knocks and shallow wake slaps kept a constant rhythm. Day stages changed by season, but remained the core unit. On flats in summer, early light allowed slightly longer reaches before heat. In hills in winter, climbs shortened to protect hooves and loads. Guides listed both versions on narrow strips. Summer reach, winter reach. Couriers sent corrections after trial rides. Scribes copied the new counts on boards at relay posts. The parasang helped as a guide, not a rule. Clear features, springs, groves, and grounds, still set each halt. Animal care adapted in small, steady ways. Winter brought thicker bedding and longer cool-downs after climbs. Grain portions rose modestly, time to work and rest. Summer brought frequent watering in short turns. Trough lids kept water clean between groups. Grooms watched tendons for heat and cleaned hooves after sandy runs. Farriers filed edges with 2 quiet strokes and checked nails. Animals stood under eaves or light shade cloth. Breathing slowed before the next stage. Clothing and gear followed the same plain logic. Winter coats, felt caps, and layered sandals appeared in cold months. Cloaks hung on pegs near the door for night watch. In summer, light tunics, headcloths, and leather wraps shielded sun. Lamp oil stood ready for long evenings in winter rooms. Torch bundles rested near gates for bridge checks. Cane mats served as windbreaks on exposed rails. A horn shade rotated among lamps to protect wicks from drafts. Maintenance calendars turned with the seasons without changing form. Before winter, crews renewed plaster on yard walls and sealed trough rims. They stacked spare gravel near edges for icy days. After spring storms, they cleared ditches and brushed silt away from culverts. In summer, they watered surfaces lightly before ramming patches on high-traffic entries. In autumn, they walked long reaches to mark small repairs before cold. The broom, the rammer, and the shovel stayed the main tools. Documents tracked these seasonal turns with short lines. Tablets noted winter ration or summer watering beside names and measures. Guard slips listed high water delay or ice at shade bend. Waybills carried the season label along with stage names. When a season version changed, the seal closed the update. Copies moved forward and backward with the first riders. Boards showed the new strips where travelers could see them. The writing stayed plain and quick to read. Inns and yards shifted in step with weather. Winter rooms held heat with small vents and thick walls. Hearth smoke hung low while quiet spoon taps marked evening meals. Doors closed early and lamps showed 3 path points: gate, trough, office. In summer, shade cloths crossed corners of the yard. Water jars stood capped within arm's reach. Floors were sprinkled, then swept to settle dust. Tie rails faced away from the sun's drop at noon. The layout remained the same. Ferries and bridges kept a seasonal notebook in simple words. Spring pages marked higher levels, longer waits, and extra crews. Summer pages marked lower levels, sandbars, and trimmed approaches. Autumn pages marked normal flow and shorter queues. Winter pages marked ice on rare mornings and sand on planks afterward. A depth staff by the landing carried notch marks from previous years. A clerk read yesterday's line before writing today's. The river's hush stayed steady under work. Security followed the same calm frame across months. Winter watches overlapped at dusk to cover long dark. Guards spread sand on plank entries and checked latch pins twice. Summer watches shifted earlier, with longer midday shade near rails. Festival weeks received extra patrols at bridgeheads. The board kept notes short. 2 lamps on deck, shade at rail, queue in rows of 5. A horn hung near the door for brief signals. Leather straps creaked softly at watch change. Food stores answered to climate and demand. Winter brought more firewood, thicker porridge, and tea water for long evenings. Summer brought more water turns, fresh dates or pressed cakes, and salted portions. Barley and straw reserves rose in autumn after harvest delivery. Oil jars stayed near hearths in winter rooms for lamp care. The scoop and the scale still measured every issue. The scribe wrote each line and pressed a small seal. The room remained even. Repair teams used season kits packed for common tasks. Winter kits held sand sacks, spare mats, and a small brazier. Spring kits held shovels for silt and poles for ferry lanes. Summer kits held shade screens, water skins, and extra cords. Autumn kits held wedges, pins, and mortar for small stone work. A portable scale and a reduced weight set traveled with each group. Strips recorded nails, pins, and rations. The seal closed the pouch ties. Regional practice varied within the shared frame. Upland stretches toward the plateau favored winter rooms with deep eaves. Riverland stretches favored timber roofs and raised floors to clear damp. Western plains favored windbreak walls and broad water lines for animals. Southwestern centers near Persepolis used Elamite tablets for seasonal rations. Many outer posts used Aramaic slips for quick notices. The words changed shape, not function. Readers understood at a glance. Across months and regions, the senses marked change while routines stayed steady. Winter sounded like lamp hiss and muffled steps on packed snow. Spring sounded like water in culverts and soft rakes on sand. Summer sounded like short pours, light broom strokes, and slow animal breaths. Autumn sounded like dry leaves, a faint file on a shoe, and carts moving without strain. Breezes carried dust scent on flats and herder calls in the Zagros. The day stage kept time through them all. Records from the late 6th and 5th centuries BCE frame this calm picture. The Persepolis fortification tablets list rations that rose and fell with season lines. Guard notes mention bridge checks and weights tied to spring flow. Itineraries show stage variants for winter and summer on familiar reaches. Seals repeat the same office marks beside these lines. Clerks and grooms followed the entries with practiced steps. The road held together because seasons were planned, not fought. Morning began earlier in summer and later in winter, yet the order matched. Lamps were trimmed or put away. Troughs were opened or covered. Lists moved to the board with the correct season strip. Water drew in turns. Grain rustled into pans. Hooves tapped in pairs toward the gate. Breezes lifted dust and then fell quiet along the line. Stages unfolded at the measured rate set for that month. The corridor continued with the same gentle care, day after day. Couriers carried orders, accounts, and festival notices during the 5th century BCE. Their routes linked western towns and southwestern centers through passes, plains, and riverlands. Notes traveled light, with small writing, firm cords, and clear seals. Some messages authorized rations or mounts at named posts. Others announced tax days, repairs, or market calendars. The aim stayed simple: short lines, fast movement, and precise delivery. Hooves drummed on compacted ground, then faded to cloth rustle in quiet yards. The rhythm fit day stages and the waiting desks at each end. Writing surfaces stayed small to keep weight low and copying quick. Clay served for durable entries that joined archives on arrival. Parchment slips and waxed boards carried moving details and short notices. Clerks used Elamite in southwestern offices and Imperial Aramaic across long corridors. Lines named the sender, the bearer, the item, and the place. A seal mark confirmed the desk of issue. When folded, a slip tied with cord held firm. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, covered the knot. Dispatch began at an office table with plain tools and fixed steps. The scribe prepared the note, checked names, and read the line aloud once. A supervising clerk warmed wax, set the cord, and pressed the seal. A docket, a short label for a packet, named destination and stage order. The registry board took one test impression beside the bearer's name. A copy stayed on the drying board. The packet went to the courier pouch. Oil lamps hissed softly while wax cooled to dull shine. Couriers traveled light and worked in short exchanges. Standard gear included a pouch, a water skin, and spare strap. A simple knife-cut cord, notches, or forage twine when needed. A passport tablet identified the bearer and his entitlements. Saddle, bridle, and a light blanket were kept ready at posts. The relay system met him with water, fodder, and a fresh mount. Hoofbeats picked up again at the gate, then steadied to an even pace. The road returned to its measured sound. Arrival at a post followed a quiet, exact order. A groom took the reins and led the fresh mount forward. The post manager checked the seal on the packet and the mark on the passport. The scribe entered time, ration, and stage just completed. Grain hissed into a shallow pan. A bucket poured with a low glug. The courier drank in turns and ate a simple portion. A receipt strip received a small seal. The pouch closed again, and the gate opened outward. Bridges and ferries handled carriers by clear rule rather than display. Couriers moved first when a queue formed, then cleared space for carts. On bridges, guards kept animals to the center and checked plank edges. On ferries, crews tied the entry chain, then set the pole or rudder. A deck knock sounded, and a shallow wake tapped the bank. Notes on weights went onto small boards on both banks. The courier's time appeared later on a tablet in the office. Day stages framed speed more than fixed distance. Open flats allowed longer stretches in cool hours. Hills and passes shortened climbs to protect animals and loads. The parasang guided memory for counts, not strict miles. Couriers sent small corrections after test rides in new seasons. Scribes copied changes onto itinerary strips at relay posts. The system accepted small edits and kept the larger shape. Even when routes bent, the paperwork stayed brief and clear. Messages varied, yet format stayed uniform to avoid delay. Orders from royal or satrapal offices set tasks and names. Accounts listed rations, loads, and received goods in round numbers. Festival notices named days, places, and market rules. Repair requests called for nails, rope, or timber at a set stage. Guard notes recorded ferry levels or bridge checks. Each kept one purpose per strip. Seals tied intent to office. Reading took moments, not minutes. Security rested on routine inspection rather than heavy force. If a seal showed a crack from handling, the post manager added a note. He retied the cord, pressed his small mark beside the original, and logged the time. If text smudged in rain, the scribe made a clean copy and sealed it. If a packet felt light, the registry board gained a line and a second seal. None of this stopped movement. It brought each piece back within clear control. Night travel occurred when stages required it, under lamps and short watch. Posts marked the tie rail and desk with steady light. Wick tips were trimmed to keep smoke low and signs visible. The courier rested while the fresh mount stood ready. Leather straps creaked once, then stilled. Cloth rustled as the pouch settled against the rider's side. Hooves struck the road in pairs, then softened with distance. The lamp flame steadied in the office behind him. Training produced uniform habits from desk to deck to gate. Couriers learned route signs, post order, and priority rules at crossings. They learned to protect seals, keep pouches dry, and report delays without blame. Scribes learned fixed openings and closing lines for each script. Managers learned to compare marks against the register with one calm glance. Guards learned the quiet signal for ferry priority and bridge pacing. The same steps repeated across districts and months. At the destination office, reception mirrored dispatch. A clerk checked the seal against the register tag. He read the line, noted arrival time, and placed the packet on a board. If the message needed copying, one slip went to the local post, another to a store, and a clay summary to the archive. A reply often left before the rider finished water and porridge. The pouch received new strips with fresh seals. The desk cleared for the next entry in order. Archives absorbed the movement without fuss. Clay tablets dried on slats, then slid into bins marked by month and office. Parchment slips lay in baskets with corded bundles under a seal. Test tags with seal impressions hung from a board. Audits sampled a few files each month and checked matches against receipts. Differences produced a correction tablet with date and reason. The bundle closed again under cord and clay. The room returned to cool air and ordered shelves. Seasonal practice shaped hours, not the rules of exchange. In summer, carriers left earlier, watered often, and rested at noon. In winter, lamps burned longer, and grain portions rose slightly. Spring added ferry weights and culvert checks. Autumn cleared dust and steadied footing. Each change received a short line on a board. The courier's path remained the same sequence. Present the packet, confirm the seal, accept the ration, and ride. The soundscape shifted gently with weather, not with method. Some messages required special packing that still fit standard checks. Clay tablets rode in padded slings when roads grew rough. Parchment letters sat in waxed wraps during rainy weeks. Wooden boards carried sketches of works or rough plans. Each piece bore a cord and a seal where hands could not open it unseen. When a piece crossed a river, the manager recorded bank and hour. The ferry deck knock and river hush joined the entry with simple words. Couriers connected offices to places beyond desks and yards. Storerooms received orders for grain, oil, and fodder with fixed measures. Guard posts received notices of patrol loops and watch changes. Inns received festival dates and expected traffic counts. Workshops received calls for shoes, pins, and rope by number. Each recipient answered with a slip and a seal. The reply entered the dispatch basket by habit. The road's quiet traffic formed a steady exchange of short lines. The system accepted fatigue and repair as part of movement, not crisis. A rider showing strain handed the pouch to the next post and rested there. A mount showing heat received water in turns, then lighter duty. A broken strap brought out spare cord without delay. A chipped sealstone went to the registry with a note. The scribe pressed a temporary mark until a new stone arrived. Records tracked these changes with dates and brief reasons. Across the 5th century BCE, the pattern held its shape. Offices used clear scripts and small formats to speed reading. Seals linked packets to desks with crisp impressions. Relay posts kept mounts ready, water measured, and gates in order. Bridges and ferries handled priority without noise. Archives kept lines in sequence, so audits were calm. The sound of the service remained familiar everywhere. Hoofbeats at the approach, a gate bar sliding, a lamp hiss, and at last, a quiet cloth rustle in the office. Local roads formed a wide mesh that fed the primary route. Villages sent grain, timber, wool, leather, and short reports toward larger depots. Western districts, including Lydia, tied market paths to the corridor by the 5th century BCE. Builders kept these roads plain, packed soil, shallow ditches, and small stone spans. Waypoints matched fields, groves, and ferries on local streams. Carts met here at set hours. Wagon rims clicked over packed gravel. The same rules of staging, seals, and receipts kept movement even and calm. Each province centered on a satrapal town. A satrap, a provincial governor, oversaw tax, stores, patrols, and repairs. His offices held record rooms, courts, and courtyards for animals and carts. Store yards stood beside the gate with scales and troughs. A dispatch room faced the road and kept the seal chest. Market days filled outer squares with bales and sacks. Clerks wrote short slips naming payer, load, and measure. Hoof taps mixed with low voices and jar glug near shaded doorways. The rhythm stayed regular, week by week. Side roads used the same building habits as greater lines, only smaller. Crews scraped brush, raked a shallow crown, and cut drains toward low ground. A light gravel top reduced mud after rain. Short culverts crossed under causeways near irrigation channels. Timber rails protected edges where wagons turned into yards. Stones marked bends, and simple posts showed distances to the satrapal town. Patches were rammed after storms. The sound stayed mild. Broom strokes, shovel taps, and the faint ring of scale pans. Grain moved in sacks from threshing floors to collection sheds. The storekeeper set a sack on the scale pan and placed weights to balance. A scribe read the number and wrote a receipt tablet. The measure often used the artaba, a large unit near 30 liters, about 8 gallons. A cord sealed the sack mouth with clay and warm wax. The impression crossed cord and clay. Sack mouth rustle answered each scoop. When a cart filled, a waybill listed place, person, and count in simple lines. Timber came from upland groves and river banks in round lengths and squared beams. Teams dragged logs to a path and loaded them on carts with poles and ropes. Yards stacked them on stones to keep air moving below. Clerks marked lengths in groups and tied bundles for transport. A short tally stick recorded pieces before the tablet was ready. Resin scent rose in warm sun. Ropes rubbed with a soft rasp against wood. Loads waited in shade for early departures to the main road. Markets linked goods from small crafts to the larger flow. Weavers brought cloth rolls. Potters brought jars and bowls. Smiths brought nails and pins. Market tolls were modest and used the same scale and weights. The scribe wrote an Aramaic docket for quick reading across districts. The door cord of the toll chest carried a bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string. Warm wax cooled to dull shine by the lamp. The docket moved to the dispatch basket without delay. Animals and carts matched each path's demands. Ox carts pulled heavy grain loads on level approaches. Donkeys and mules carried smaller pieces on firmer shoulders. Tether posts lined the yard so handlers could keep order. Water moved in steady turns so hooves did not slip on wet stone. Grooms checked shoes and strap knots before leaving. A spare pin and a short rope coil hung from each cart. Wheels creaked, then settled into the smooth beat of packed gravel. Lydia in the west offers a clear example of these links. Roads from hill farms and river flats converged near Sardis. Paths followed terraces above the Hermus Plain and dropped to crossings at set landings. Timber and grain reached depots inside the town's outer walls. Metal from nearby workshops traveled the same way, stacked in small bars. Couriers from the corridor met clerks at dispatch doors. Notes moved inward, and loads moved outward on the same quiet schedule. Security watched forks, bridge entries, and market gates without display. Small detachments kept queues in rows and checked cords and seals. Lamps in niches marked rail and entry after dusk. Watch lists shifted by season, matching harvest and festival weeks. When traffic grew heavy, guards opened a side lane for empty carts. Voices stayed low. Leather straps creaked during gear checks. A horn on a peg marked short signals, rarely used and never loud. Reports moved beside goods and kept offices aligned. Village headmen sent short notes on water shares, bridge repairs, and road damage. Tax lists named fields, owners, and measures due. Patrol sheets recorded quiet passes and minor fixes. Couriers carried these packets to the satrapal center. A clerk read the seal, pressed a receipt, and filed the piece by month. Replies returned with a simple order: repair a culvert, clear a ditch, or add sand at a bend. Seasonal changes shaped the side network without surprise. Winter narrowed upland paths and slowed carts on frosted slopes. Spring filled channels and ferries, then softened fields near approaches. Summer dried top layers and called for early starts and shade cloths. Autumn brought harvest traffic and steady winds. Scribes marked these turns on boards with short notes. Patrols walked loops after storms and before market days. Breezes carried dust scent past yard walls. and faint calls from herders on distant ridges. Depots inside the satrapal towns kept order through set rooms and tools. A weighing hall held 2 scales and a chest of standard weights. A storeroom kept sacks on stones and jars on shelves. A repair shed stored wheels, pins, wedges, and rope. An office kept a board of seal tags, a lamp on stone, and a drying rack. The scribe's tray held stylus, pen, knife, and small water bowl. Paper rustle and reed scratches formed the main sounds in that room. Receipts linked village work to larger tallies. A grain payer took a clay strip with name, amount, and date. A cart driver received a way-bill for loads bound for the corridor. A market craftsperson received a small slip for toll. At month's end, the office bound strips with cord and sealed the knot. The bundle lay on a shelf with the others. Audits sampled a few and weighed a few sacks again. A correction tablet handled rare errors with one short line. Bridges and ferries on side streams followed the larger pattern on a smaller scale. Timber trestles crossed narrow channels where banks were firm. Cable ferries guided boats where depth and current demanded them. A depth staff marked changes during spring rise. A landing board listed wait times and order. Poles knocked decks with a blunt sound. Wakes tapped banks below plank edges. The calm sequence repeated: queue, load, cross, unload, and move on. Communication with the main corridor stayed active and brief. A daily pouch carried stage updates, ration needs, and market counts. Relay posts on the corridor returned notes on waits and repairs. When a detour opened, side posts received a narrow strip with the new link. Scribes pinned the strip on the board and pressed a small seal. Couriers read the line, adjusted the day stage, and rode. The papers remained compact and easy to scan. Craft workshops near depots supported roadwork with steady supply. Farriers made shoes and nails. Rope makers twisted fibers into long cords. Wheelwrights set new rims and trimmed spokes. Timber cutters squared short beams for bridges and racks. Orders named number, size, and delivery day in round terms. A stamp sealed the margin. The workshop yard sounded like light file strokes, soft plane shavings, and a measured hammer tap. Finished pieces stacked under a lean-to roof. Tax grain, labor duties, and market payments flowed through the same channels. The satrapal office posted rates after each harvest. Farmers delivered shares in measured lots. Laborers repaired a set reach or carried loads for a set time. Market sellers paid a toll by weight or count. The office used one register for all 3. Names appeared in 2 scripts when needed and then settled into local form. The method preferred clarity over flourish. Storage and hygiene kept goods sound for slow months. Vents near roof lines moved air above stacked sacks. Rodent guards stood under shelf legs. Sweepings left at dusk each night. Oil jars wore fiber caps under waxed cord. Troughs drained to soak pits outside the wall. Water jars stayed capped when not in use. The smell in the room stayed clean. Clay dust, dry grain, light resin from wax, and faint wood. Nothing sharp or strong. Training made habits uniform across many towns. New clerks learned standard lines and numerals. New storekeepers learned scoop sizes and balance checks. New guards learned cue stones and gate order. New grooms learned calm watering turns and simple knots. Watch leaders learned to note a broken seal without blame. Workshops took apprentices through quiet tasks before larger ones. The whole mesh worked because roles stayed clear and repeatable. By the 5th century BCE, these side roads carried more than goods. They carried news of repairs finished, stores moved, and markets planned. They carried small gifts between neighboring towns. They carried festival notices toward temples and halls. They returned empties, tools, and messages back to farms. The corridor received this steady flow without strain. Wagon rims clicked over packed gravel at the approach. A gate bar slid with a low scrape. Then the loads and the notes entered, counted, and sealed. Where current served better than road, teams shifted cargo onto river craft. The Tigris and Euphrates carried staged movement during high water months in the 5th century BCE. River stations stood at bends with firm banks and wide approaches. A packed ramp met a short quay, a built landing edge, with mooring posts. Store yards held scales, jar racks, and rope coils. Clerks worked at a small table, with lamp and seal case. Rope rasped on wet wood while oars dipped evenly into dark water. River stations followed a simple, repeatable layout. An upper yard received carts from side roads. A weighing shed faced the scale and the record board. A roofed store kept spare stoppers, wax, pitch, and jar covers. The lower landing held the mooring line, fenders, and a gangplank. A depth staff stood near the curb to mark daily levels. Lamps and niches showed rail and plank after dusk. Water moved with a steady hush under the timbers. Footsteps thudded low on packed earth. Boats matched channel shape and season. Flat-bottomed barges carried heavy jars and sacks in slow water. Light skiffs ran messages and pilots between stages. Reed boats and skin rafts served shallows and short links. A coracle, a small round skin boat over a light frame, ferried a person or two across slack reaches. Steering used a sweep oar at the stern. Poles worked close to shore and at landings. Oars made an even dip and lift. The hull creaked softly against fenders. Loading used clear steps that fitted scales and seals. A cart reached the upper yard and stopped at marked stones. The storekeeper set a sack or jar on the pan. Weights rose on the other side until the beam steadied. The scribe read the number and wrote a line in Aramaic or Elamite. A cord closed the mouth and took clay and wax. The seal crossed cord and clay. Hands shifted the load to a sled, then down the ramp to the gangplank. Planks tapped under even feet. Stowage kept weight low and spread across the hull. Dunnage, wooden strips placed under cargo, leveled the deck and protected boards. Jars lay in rows with reed mats between shoulders. Sacks stood near the center, not near the rail. Timber beams sat lengthwise and lashed to cleats. A tally ran along a plank beside the cargo. The pilot checked trim with a glance at the waterline. When balance looked right, lashings tightened in order. Rope rubbed the cleat with a dry rasp. Seals and slips tied cargo to offices and stages. A docket named owner, goods, measure, and destination in short lines. A cylinder seal rolled across a bulla, a clay envelope over a tied string, on the cargo cord. A second seal marked the boat line at the mooring post. The clerk placed a copy on the drying board and a twin in the pouch. A manifest tablet listed every piece by group and weight. Wax cooled to dull shine near the lamp. Paper rustle mixed with water hush. Boat stages worked like road day stages, but time followed current. A stage ended at a known landing with water, repair gear, and guards. Distances varied by flow, wind, and bends. In high water months, stages ran long with few groundings. In low water weeks, stages shortened to protect hulls and lashings. Pilots watched for eddies at points and slack water behind bars. They aimed for shade at midday and hot periods. Oars dipped evenly while banks slid past in steady lines. Navigation relied on soundings and marks more than on guesswork. A sounding pole tested depth ahead of shallow bars. A lead line checked mid-channel when color deceived the eye. Marker poles stood on low points to show the safe lane after floods. A pilot counted strokes between bends and watched reeds for wind. A gnomon, a vertical stick for tracking the sun's shadow, fixed local noon on the landing board. The crew kept notes plain: bend, bar, eddy, and ford. High water months brought speed and caution together. Melt and rain lifted levels and hid bars, yet carried boats farther each day. Mooring lines moved higher on posts, and fenders sat thicker at planks. Cable ferries upstream kept their anchor posts tight. Landings added extra hands for steady loading on slippery curbs. Crews checked lashings again before push-off. Wake slaps sounded under the quay and faded as the hull steadied. The manifest board gained an early arrival line. Low water months asked for lighter loads and closer steering. Skippers shifted cargo from one barge to two smaller craft. Skin rafts took short sections where channels broke into threads. Poles worked more than oars near bars and shoals. At the worst reaches, goods moved a short way by road, then returned to boats. The docket showed this portage as one calm line. Dust rose along the bank while men walked the gangplank again. The river's hush returned beyond the bar. Repair and maintenance stayed constant and small in scale. Pitch warmed in a pot for caulking seams at landings. A low brazier, a metal pan for charcoal, hissed and kept the pot warm. A mallet tapped pegs into oarlocks. A file smoothed a burr on a ring. Spare oars lay under a cover, with thole pins in a pouch. When a seam wept, a brush laid pitch along the line. The smell of warm resin mixed with wet wood. The hull dried in shade before loading resumed. Security kept order without noise. Guards watched the landing, the mooring posts, and the yard gate. A handbell gave short signals for cue changes. Lamps showed the plank and the office door after dark. The door cord of the storeroom carried a fresh bulla at night. Two impressions, guard and store, sat side by side. In the morning, the guard logged the break and a new seal. Voices stayed low. Leather straps creaked once as gear settled on shoulders. River stages linked satrapal centers to outlying stores. Grain for depots moved downstream in heavy jars and sacks. Timber for bridge frames traveled in rafts tied with cross ropes. Stone moved rarely by water, but short runs aided causeway work. Oil and wine jars rode in padded racks toward towns. Empty containers returned upstream by lighter craft or carts on the bank road. Couriers rode the towpath when notes needed quick delivery. Records met them at the next landing in order. Rations for boat crews matched effort and weather. The Persepolis region's archives record measured issues for transport teams in this era. Lines list flour, beer or wine, and oil by day or stage. They show fodder for animals that hauled carts to the landing. They show seal marks and dates in calm hands. At the wharf, portions stayed modest and regular. A jar glugged into a dipper. Bread and lentils filled a bowl. The scribe noted the line and pressed a small stamp. The daily rhythm kept movement smooth. At first light, the pilot checked level against the staff. The clerk posted the stage strip and sealed the pouch. Lashings tightened in the same order as the day before. A pole pushed the bow clear. The stern line slipped free. Oars dipped in pairs, then found an even beat. Reeds rustled at the bank. Farther out, the current took the load. Midday brought shade under a high bank and a check of lashings. Evening tied the boat to a calm post. Bridges and ferries interacted with boat traffic by simple rules. Ferries crossed between landings during gaps in barge trains. Bridge trestles held fenders to turn drift and hulls. Guards paced deck edges and watched for lines that caught. A sounding pole marked safe clearance after floods. Notices on both banks listed hours for land crossings during busy days. When a barge passed, wake tapped the piles with a low rhythm. The river's order returned at once. Records from the 5th century BCE give anchors for this picture. Administrative tablets in southwestern centers show rations for transport crews and guards. Classical writers later described long river craft and rafts in Mesopotamia. Archaeology finds landings, mooring stones, and repair spaces along old channels. Together, they outline a plain method: weigh, seal, lash, and move by stages. The water carried weight with less strain than wheels when levels were right. Night routines closed the landing in measured steps. The manifest board came inside. The lamp stood on stone, wick trimmed short. The store door received a cord and fresh clay. The seal cooled to dull shine. A guard walked the posts once and noted the hour. Rope creaked as lines settled on damp wood. The river kept its soft run along the bank. In the morning, crews would set the gangplank again, count the weights, and feel the rope rasp as oars dipped into the first light. Seal cutting in the 5th century BCE served quiet administrative needs. Workshops likely clustered near courts and store yards in southwestern Iran. Artisans carved hard stones into cylinder seals and stamp seals for desks. A cylinder seal was a small stone that rolled a reverse design. The roll produced a readable band on soft clay. Stamp seals pressed a single image straight down. Finished pieces identified an office and secured cords. Fine grit whispered under file strokes while lamps burned low. Stones came from several sources by trade and local finds. Cutters selected chalcedony, agate, hematite, and similar dense pieces. They chose blocks large enough for a 2 to 4 centimeter cylinder. Each blank was trimmed to a smooth, even shape. Ends were squared to avoid rocking during rolling. Surfaces were polished before engraving began. A narrow axial hole ran through the length for a cord. The stone felt cool and steady in the hand. No decoration mattered until the lines read clean on clay. Tools were simple and durable. The main device was a bow drill, a drill turned by a bowstring. Copper points, charged with abrasive sand, cut the axial hole in details. Abrasive came from ground quartz or emery mixed with water. Files shaped edges. Burnishers of wood or bone smoothed surfaces. A shallow bowl held water for rinsing grit. A reed mat kept parts from slipping. Work moved in small strokes. The room sounded like soft scraping and controlled, even turns. Cutting began with shaping and drilling. The cutter set the blank in a soft cradle and marked center points. The bow drill opened the hole from both ends to meet in the middle. Water cooled the stone and kept dust low. After drilling, the cylinder turned against fine grit to true the outside. Files corrected small flats or high spots. Ends were checked against a square plate. The blank rolled smoothly across a board. Only then did the artisan lay out the design lines. Design work used light guidelines and steady depth. The cutter sketched borders and simple registers for alignment. He incised reversed lines so the impression read forward. Figures, animals, or signs took shallow cuts for quick drying on clay. Deep cuts risked drag and blur. After a few strokes, the cutter tested the face. A damp clay plug received the roll and kept a record of each pass. The clay showed where lines met, crossed, or broke. Adjustments followed, then another careful roll. Testing on clay happened many times before approval. Damp plugs sat in a tray near the bench. Each recorded a stage of the work. The artisan studied clarity, spacing, and straight travel. He checked whether edges churned clay or stayed smooth. He rolled across a pretend cord on the plug to simulate a bulla. A bulla was a clay envelope over a tied string. The test ensured the band crossed cord and clay without gaps. Edges were trimmed again if drag appeared. Finishing joined polishing and practical fittings. A burnisher smoothed the field around lines so clay released cleanly. The cylinder received a light polish using fine grit and water. The axial hole was widened slightly for a cord sleeve. Some offices used a small metal collar to protect the entry. The surface was wiped and checked for chips under lamplight. The artisan made a final roll on a clean plug. Crisp ridges showed even depth and true travel from edge to edge. Workshop rooms stayed small, ordered, and easy to clean. Benches stood near a window or vent for steady light. A lamp sat on a stone to steady the base. A water bowl, grit trays, and tool rolls lay within reach. Shelves held stone blanks and finished pieces in labeled slots. A board carried test impressions with dates and names. A chest stored approved seals before delivery. Paper rustled from the adjacent office mixed with file strokes. The air smelled of wet stone and warm oil. Commissions arrived by short slips from administrative rooms. A scribe named the office, the holder, and the purpose. The slip sometimes requested a cylinder for cords or a stamp for tablet margins. The cutter matched stone size to task. After approval, the office clerk added the seal to a registry list. A test tag carried the new impression beside the entry. When custody changed, the registry gained a fresh line. The stone itself stayed with the office, not with a person. Quality control favored legibility and reliable rolling over flourish. Lines needed to print in one smooth pass without overlap. Borders guided straight travel on wet clay. Small chips near the field edge were polished away. If a figure blurred, the cutter reduced depth and reset the angle. Tests always included a roll across a corded plug. The goal was a band that locked cord and clay together. Clarity mattered more than crowded detail. Offices valued clean checks at busy doors. Repairs and replacements used brief, practical steps. If a seal edge chipped, the cutter trimmed and restored the border. If a crack reached the design, he copied the pattern onto a new stone. The registry marked the retirement and the successor. The old stone moved to storage with a dated tag. If a holder lost custody, the office recorded the change and cut a new piece. The process protected records without pause in field work. Notes stayed calm and exact. Material supply followed known routes. Traders brought stone from hills and riverbeds across the plateau. Small lots traveled by cart with other goods. Workshops kept a modest stock to handle steady orders. Grit came from groundstone, refreshed often. Wax for testing cords came from storerooms near the court. Pitch for tool handles sat in a covered jar. Nothing in the room looked precious. Value rested in repeatable cuts and clean impressions. Season and climate shaped work pace without changing method. In summer heat, wax softened faster near the lamp, so tests moved away. In winter, the lamp stood closer for steady light. Dusty months brought more rinses and cloth wipes. Damp spells asked for longer drying of plugs before review. The bow drills still turned in even strokes. The file still whispered along an edge. The lamp flame kept its small, steady hiss across months. Training built uniform skills over patient years. Apprentices learned to square ends, true cylinders, and drill straight holes. They practiced rolling test plugs without twist. They learned to cut shallow lines that printed clearly. They studied common borders and signs used by offices. They recorded every test in order on a board. A senior cutter checked each stage and corrected posture and pressure. The craft aimed for quiet mastery, not display. The result was reliable marks across many desks. Delivery linked the workshop to guard posts and storerooms. The finished seal rode in a small case with a clay test tag. A clerk at the office compared the tag to a fresh impression. He wrote a receipt line with date and purpose. The registry board gained the new pattern under the office name. A cord passed through the axial hole, ready for daily use. Soon the roll crossed fresh bully on chest cords and door ties. The same band appeared beside ration lines and packet knots. Evidence for this picture rests in objects and archives from the region. Cylinder seals and impressions from southwestern centers show consistent cutting habits. Many impressions on the Persepolis fortification tablets date to 509-494 BCE. They show crisp borders, straight travel, and bands crossing cords. Excavated workshops and tool marks support abrasive cutting with copper tools. Scholars suggest court clusters because orders moved quickly between rooms. The method seen across pieces feels practical and repeatable rather than grand. At day's end, the room returned to its plain order. Stones went to slots, tools to rolls, plugs to a tray. Water bowls emptied and wiped. The lamp wick was trimmed short. The chest closed with a cord and a small clay cover. A final test plug dried with the day's date scratched lightly. The air held wet stone scent and faint resin from wax. In the morning, the bow drill would hum again, and fine grit would whisper under careful file strokes. After 330 BCE, new rulers stepped into a working road system. Many routes, yards, and ferries stayed in use with adjusted names. Scholars suggest that fresh officials preferred known paths over risky experiments. Relay posts, store rooms, and guard niches continued to serve. Local staff kept short records and sealed cords as before, staging by day, not by fixed miles, still guided time. Evening reed flutes mixed with cart axle murmurs beyond gate walls. Lamps burned low while boards showed the next day's strips. Administrative language changed more than the habits of work. In several western districts, Greek notes became common for moving orders. Elsewhere, Aramaic remained useful for cross-region lists and receipts. Clay tablets declined in some centers while parchment and ink rose. Yet the core steps stayed steady. Write the line, tie the cord, press the seal. Cylinder seals appeared less often. Signet stamps and ring bezels grew common. Belay, clay envelopes for tied strings, still guarded knots. Warm wax cooled to a dull surface near the lamp. Posts and inns kept familiar layouts with minor repairs and new labels. Courtyards offered roofed corners, low hearths, and storage rooms as before. Troughs lined one side. Tool racks faced the gate. Managers now reported to different offices, but schedules barely shifted. The board listed stages, ferry notes, and ration lines. Spoon taps sounded in the winter room while smoke hung low. Grooms measured fodder, then checked hooves in calm order. Dogs settled near the rail, and the latch made a soft click. Courier service continued under altered titles. Sources from later centuries named new offices, but the method looked old. Riders carried small packets with seals and brief lines. Pass notes approved rations, mounts, and ferry priority. Relay yards swapped tired mounts for fresh ones in short steps. Guards kept queues steady at bridges and passes. The rule remained simple: present the seal, receive the measure, and ride. Hooves drummed at departure, then faded to cloth rustle near fields. Weights and measures retained recognizable standards with mild regional shifts. Scales hung from beams, and standard stones sat in chests. Many units traced to earlier reforms, though names sometimes changed. Stores weighed flour, oil, and wine as before. Jars bore marks for capacity. Scoops matched weight stones. Audits balanced pans with a soft ring and wrote short corrections. Markets near western depots used coins more often, but balance checks still ruled. The beam steadied. The scribe wrote, "The seal closed the line." Rivers remained partners to the road during high water months. On the Tigris and Euphrates, stations loaded jars, sacks, and timber onto craft. Barges moved long stages downstream with careful trim. Landings posted depth on a staff and logged arrivals by hour. Rope rasped on wet wood, while oars dipped evenly in cadence. Ferries crossed in planned gaps between trains of boats. Manifests listed groups by bundle and weight. At dusk, mooring lines settled, and water kept a quiet run along pilings. Side roads fed new centers much like earlier satrapal towns. Western districts, including Lydia, linked hill paths to depots near major markets. Carts carried grain, wool, and worked timber toward the corridor. Weighing halls still kept 2 scales and a chest of weights. Repair sheds stored rims, pins, wedges, and spare rope. Dockets named payer, load, and route in short lines. Seals marked chest cords at day's end. Wagon rims clicked over packed gravel as queues formed at the gate. Security stayed practical and low in voice. Guard posts watched bridge entries, market doors, and yard corners. Lamps in niches marked rails and office thresholds after dark. Patrol loops crossed passes at set hours, then returned to sign the board. If a tie cracked on a door, the clerk noted, resealed, and moved on. Records focused on time, measure, and mark, not long stories. The same calm signs showed control. 2 impressions on a cord and a dated line. Documents adjusted format without losing purpose. Letters of passage replaced some clay notes. Small wooden tablets carried others. Festival notices named days and places in clear terms. Repair orders called for nails, timber, and rope by number. Waybills still framed stages from river to road and back. Copies moved forward and backward to keep desks aligned. Where scripts shifted, the seal bridged reading gaps. Clerks compared the impression, then issued goods in measured turns. Archaeology and later texts support this measured continuity. Roadbeds in Western Asia Minor show layered repairs across centuries. Reused milestones and curbstones appear near old crossings. Storerooms reveal troughs, ovens, and lamp niches in familiar positions. Seal impressions persist on bullae tied to doors and chests. Scholars suggest that staging, sealing, and simple passes outlasted dynastic change. New rulers preferred steady flow to risky redesigns. The record tone remains administrative and calm. Seasonal planning changed least of all. Winter narrowed high passes. Summer stretched day stages on flats. Spring brought culvert clearing and posted ferry weights. Autumn moved harvest straw and hay toward depots. Boards shifted to winter or summer strips with brief lines. Trough lids closed between turns and frost. Shade cloths hung over rails in heat. Breezes carried dust scent through tamarisk near yards. The same tools returned to their pegs after each round. Workshops that served offices also adapted without noise. Seal cutters favored stamps for quick marks beside tablet margins. Engravers still tested impressions on damp plugs to confirm clarity. Fine grit whispered under file strokes in small rooms near courts. Scribes kept reed pens, ink cups, and drying boards within reach. Repair shops made rims, pins, and rope as orders arrived. The registry board added new patterns and retired old ones with dates. The chain of custody stayed visible. Into later centuries, basic habits held their shape across regions. Posts stage travel by day and water by stage. Stores weighed goods with shared units and sampled counts in audits. Offices tied cords, pressed seals, and filed brief lines. Names of rulers, towns, and offices shifted on the page. The handwriting changed, yet the desk looked the same. Evening reed flutes mixed with card-axle murmurs beyond the wall. Lamps hissed softly while notes dried and seals cooled to a quiet sheen. Across 550, 330 BCE, three tools linked far places in calm sequence. A planned road set firm ground under hooves and wheels. A wax impression fixed identity in a moment. A brief tablet recorded who, what, where, and when. Together they joined Sardis, Susa, and many posts between. The order was practical, small, and repeatable. Hoof echoes came and went on compacted soil. Lamplight held steady over boards and seals. Quiet air cooled sacks and jars against yard walls. The road worked because crews built a stable surface in layers. Packed earth and gravel formed a crown that shed water to ditches. Causeways crossed wet ground. Culverts let runoff pass beneath. Timber rails guarded weak edges at turns. In passes, cut benches opened a level line. On flats, a shallow rise kept centers firm. Morning steps tested patches after rain. Wheels clicked over joined stones near bridges. Dust lifted lightly, then settled along the shoulder. Relay stations kept pace by fresh mounts and measured turns. Yards offered water troughs, feed bins, and rails under shade. Managers kept seals and boards within reach of the gate. Grooms filled pans and led animals forward in order. Scribes checked permit tablets, then wrote short receipt lines. Bucket splash, grain rustle, and strap creak set the sound. A mount shifted weight, then stilled. The gate bar moved with a slow scrape. The same rhythm returned at the next post. Bridges and ferries carried traffic over wide water without fuss. Timber trestles stood on firm bottoms where channels allowed frames. Deck planks ran straight with shallow curbs for hooves. Ferries crossed on poles in slow water or on cables in swifter flow. Landings used stone ramps and posts with ring bolts. Guards watched queues and posted short wait notes. A pole knocked the deck with a blunt sound. Shallow wakes tapped planks below. River hush filled the space between crossings. Wayfinding used day stages and features, not fixed miles. Guides listed springs, groves, and wide caravan grounds for halts. The lists named what lasted through seasons and years. A spring apron, a tamarisk line, a grove of poplars, a worked curb. The parasang guided counting without strict arithmetic. Copies moved forward and backward so posts stayed aligned. Wind moved through leaves with a steady rasp. Pack bells clicked as animals settled in their rows. Guard posts kept order with small tools and steady light. Short walls and a simple gate framed the yard. Watch lists covered bridge entries and passes at fixed hours. Lamps burned in niches and hissed softly when trimmed. A bulla, a clay envelope for a tied string, sealed the door cord at night. In the record room, a reed stylus touched clay beside a lamp. Leather straps creaked when watches changed. The latch fell to its seat with a dull click. Writing joined local rooms to the larger line. Elamite served southwestern offices. Imperial Aramaic linked far districts. Clay tablets held rations and routes in neat rows. Parchment slips and wooden boards carried notices between posts. The Persepolis fortification tablets, around 509 to 494 BCE, preserved many such lines. They named people, measures, animals, and places in plain words. Ink dried near lamps, clay dried on slats, paper rustle mixed with quiet counting in measured breaths. Passage relied on small proofs that read at a glance. Passport tablets authorized fodder, mounts, and ferry priority. Seals tied identity to a desk and a date. Cylinder seals rolled crisp bands across clay ties. Stamp seals pressed quick marks at tablet margins. Warm wax held cord ends and cooled to a dull surface. Registry boards kept test impressions near names. A clerk compared edges, then nodded. The pouch closed, and the mount turned toward the gate. Stores moved goods by units that answered to the scale. Weights matched scoops. Scoops matched sacks and jars. Pans touched with a soft ring, then steadied under equal load. The artaba held a round measure for grain and liquid. Rations listed flour, beer or wine, oil, and fodder. Receipts used short figures that traveled well between rooms. A stamp sealed the margin. A bulla covered a knot. Order rested on balance as much as on words. Side roads brought villages and markets into the same frame. Western districts, including Lydia, sent grain, timber, cloth, and jars inward. Depots near courts kept racks, scales, and repair tools under eaves. Dockets named payer, load, and stage. Guards watched fork roads, then signed the board. Wagon rims clicked over packed gravel into shaded yards. Farriers filed edges with 2 slow strokes. Rope coils hung ready for quick mends. The corridor met these lines without strain. Rivers added calm reach when levels rose enough for stages. The Tigris and Euphrates moved jars, sacks, and timber on barges. Landings stood at bends with firm approaches and mooring stones. A manifest tablet listed bundles by group and weight. Rope rasped on wet wood while oars dipped evenly. Ferries crossed in clear gaps between trains of boats. Wake tapped pilings with a low rhythm. At dusk, lines settled, and water kept its quiet run along the bank. Seasons changed steps without breaking the method. Winter narrowed saddles and kept lamps burning longer at dawn. Spring raised rivers and filled culverts that crews cleared in order. Summer stretched early light and added shade cloth on rails. Autumn steadied winds and brought straw and hay toward depots. Boards shifted to winter or summer strips with brief marks. Trough lids closed between turns in frost. Breezes carried dust scent past tamarisk and low walls. Hands and tools made this order visible in small rooms. Seal cutters carved hard stones and rolled tests on damp plugs. Fine grit whispered under file strokes near court doors. Scribes kept reed pens, knives, and ink cups beside drying boards. Storekeepers lifted weights and set scoops with patient care. Guards checked ties and seals, then wrote a short line. Grooms watered mounts in turns, then set shallow pans. Every roll touched the record and the road. By 330 BCE, names and offices shifted while habits persisted. New rulers favored known lines and working yards. Letters of passage replaced some clay notes, yet seals still spoke. Staging by days, not strict miles, continued across plains and passes. Weights and jars balanced as before. Bridges and ferries followed the same quiet order. The sense remained administrative, practical, and calm. The corridor held together because objects and steps repeated. What endures on the page is modest and clear. A tablet lists flour and oil for a courier and groom. A docket names a ferry, a bridge, and one delay. A seal band crosses cord and clay in a straight pass. A weight rests and a pointer stands at level. A yard shows a trough, a rail, and a lamp niche. Nothing large needs saying when small parts fit well. The record reads like steady breath. What remains along ground is also plain to imagine. A compacted surface carries a measured line between towns. A timber curb holds a bridge deck above slow water. A landing stone keeps a mooring rope from chewing soil. A low hearth warms a winter room and softens a wax pellet. A board leans near a door, its strips neat and dated. Quiet steps pass from gate to rail and back again. The path continues without strain. Across these pages, the outline returned to routine objects and rooms. A roadbed lifted slightly at the center and shed rain. A seal case opened and closed with a small click. A passport tablet fit in a pouch and left a dry edge. A scale balanced and gave back a round number. A clerk signed the line and placed it to dry. Hoof echoes reached the gate, faded, and returned on the far side. For a last moment the scene rests inside a calm yard. Lamps hiss softly from niches and mark the desk and rail. Evening air feels light against walls that held day heat. A groom sets a pan down, and grain moves with a dry hiss. A bucket gives one low glug at the trough, then stillness. The board shows tomorrow's stages in clear strips. Nothing urgent enters the room. Past the wall, the road keeps its even sound. A pair of hooves taps, then softens over firm soil. A cart axle murmurs at distance, then falls quiet again. Leaves move lightly above a bench near the gate. A guard strap creaks once, then settles. The lamp's flame holds a small, steady point of light. The air remains cool and slow. Let the last details continue in low contrast and simple form. Hoof echoes, lamp hiss, and light night air continue in gentle blend. Their pattern changes slightly, then returns to the same steady line. The yard stays ordered. The tools rest in familiar places. The records wait on slats until morning. The road remains open between towns, as it did before. The quiet holds for another minute, and then one more.